Hello and welcome to And the Runner-Up Is. This week on the show, we're talking the 1990 Best Actress race at the Academy Awards, where Kathy Bates won for her performance in Misery. But why did she beat fellow nominees Anjelica Huston, Julia Roberts, Meryl Streep, and Joanne Woodward? We'll explore all this and more on today's season premiere of And the Runner-Up Is. Hello and welcome back to the season premiere of And the Runner-Up Is. I'm your host, Kevin Jacobson, here to talk about the 63rd year of Best Actress at the Oscars, which covered the films of 1990. We'll be discussing how Kathy Bates won, why the losers lost, and who we think was the runner-up of this Best Actress race. And my guest today is actually appearing on the show for the very first time. His writing has been found on Awards Watch and Queer Tea and Newsday. Welcome to the show, Eddie Mouradian.
Hi, Kevin. Thank you so much for having me. I don't know why I did not put together that it's the 1990 show and it's also the season premiere, so I'm doubly honored to be here. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, I'm honored to have you here to kick off a really, I would say probably a good decade for the Oscars at Best Actress. I don't know if everyone agrees with that, but yeah, I think this is a good tone setter.
Yeah, I think
this
so.
lineup.
You could just skip over 94, and I think it's a pretty good.
Yeah. This is true. Every decade has a
Jessica
stinker.
Lange catching strays already. 2 minutes
I
in.
know, right?
Sorry.
Well, before we talk 1990, let's talk Best Actress as a category. So as I ask every first-timer on the show, just to give the listeners an idea of your taste, what would you say is your favorite Best Actress win of all time?
Well, apropos of me being here, Julia Roberts' win for Erin Brockovich in 2000 is my all-time favorite Best Actress win because full circle, starting in 1990, when she laughed onto the scene, I should say, in Pretty Woman.
Right.
I was, 9 years old. I was in love. She's my number one all time. And then to see her win for not like a career, not just like a career win, but like for the perfect role that is well acted, but also like a movie star role, because that's what she did. She didn't win like a monster like kind of transformation Oscar, because that's not her thing. And to win and rightfully win, in my opinion, in such a competitive year, I've seen that speech 1,000 times this year in a Vulture movie fantasy league. My shameless plug to this had Oscar buzz. My name was Julie Roberts' vintage Valentino dress. It's my absolute favorite moment of all time.
Wow, I love that. I love that Julia Roberts has actually come up more often than I thought she would as the pick for people as their favorite of all time, because again, like, not to like denigrate her performance obviously, but it isn't that big transformative, obvious, showy kind of thing. Even though it is her being like full force Julia Roberts, it does really feel like everything kind of crystallized with her in that moment. And I agree, it doesn't feel like a career win. It didn't feel like, oh, she's just like the ingenue giving it her first go and all that. It was just like, you couldn't have written it better for her to win that year.
It was a perfect maybe the only thing more perfect, she wins for like a Notting Hill or my best friend's wedding, right? Like something that she's like transcends the form, but just nothing brought me more joy.
I love that. All right, well, on the flip side, to do the opposite of joy, my other question is, what would you say is your most heartbreaking loss in this category?
I have been like really thinking about this, like more than I should. Like, work has suffered. I haven't slept. I haven't I'm barely eating.
Wow.
And I know that it's a Best Actress race, so I can't say my all-time, it's a snub and a not win is Jennifer Lopez in Hustlers. I know that's not what we're discussing here. This can't be a 6-hour podcast because I could go
Right.
on and
Oh my
on.
God.
But
Yeah.
I really think that what I landed on was, to my surprise, an actress who like did not need another Oscar, who we'll talk about today. But I do think that Meryl Streep's performance in The Bridges of Madison County is her all-time greatest performance. It is held up so well. I do not begrudge Susan Sarandon an Oscar. I don't think it was time for Meryl to win her third, which is something, again, we'll talk about today. But if we're talking about a performance that I loved so much that didn't win, it would be that. And also, I'm not gonna say Glenn Close. I know whose house I'm in. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not gonna say for the wife.
Fair enough. But no, yeah, that's absolutely like a top tier Meryl performance that I'm very excited to get to in a few weeks. And that whole race, I think you could make a case for arguably any of them winning. I think honest.
Easily one of the best actor and underrated. Like, you're not talking about that race as much as you could be.
Right. Plus those outside of the race, like Nicole Kidman in To Die For, like it's just stacked.
Yeah, you can make a whole other, it's like one of those years where you can make a whole other top 5 and not even include any of the women who were nominated.
Right.
Gorgeous.
Excellent picks. Definitely. So let us talk about this year at the Oscars, the 63rd Academy Awards. The nominees were Kathy Bates in Misery, Anjelica Huston in The Grifters, Julia Roberts in Pretty Woman, Meryl Streep in Postcards from the Edge, and Joanne Woodward in Mr. and Mrs. Bridge, with the winner being Miss Kathy Bates. So before we break down these performances individually, would love to know your overall thoughts on this lineup.
Well, one of the reasons that I reached out to you about this, 3 of these movies are 3 of my favorite movies of all time. Like, not just anecdotally, like, oh, I love that movie, one of my favorite movies of all time. I'm talking like top 5 to top 7 of all time. Wow. Pretty Woman, Postcards from the Edge, and Misery.
Formative year.
Just, I have some real personal connections to all 3 of those movies. And what I like about this race is that you can make a case for any of these 5. But the tale of, I think, Kathy Bates's win for Annie Wilkes is so long, not just in the horror genre, not just in like the fact that a horror performance won for a Stephen King movie, and like what Kathy Bates's career went on to be, in relation to Oscars, and how really, other than Dolores Claiborne, she doesn't have another shot at even a Best Actress nomination after this. So I do think she is so perfectly unhinged. But then you have like the movie star performance, and then you have kind of like Meryl doing comedy, who knew? And then you have like the career with Joanne Woodward. And then, of course, like Anjelica Huston is giving probably like the critics' consensus. So it could go any which way. Catch me on a different day. I pick one of the other ones. But to me, I think they got it right with Kathy Bates.
Wow. Yeah, full. So first of all, happy that we're now in the 90s. Yay, that. Going to be a very fun decade to track, I think. I didn't see all of these performances before this week, so I wasn't sure like what I was going to think of this lineup, but maybe this is recency bias, I don't know, but I think this is honestly one of my favorite lineups that I've watched so far. Like, I can genuinely, like you said, make a case for any of them winning, and they're all doing such different things. So yeah, they all have their strengths, and it's kind of hard to even compare them to each other, honestly.
But we will. But we will.
Which, of course, that's what we're here to do, folks. But starting with the top, yeah, I mean, Kathy Bates coming relatively out of nowhere and delivering this instantly iconic horror performance and winning an Oscar. It just feels like such a unicorn situation.
It's such a, like, to me, Marissa Tomei and My Cousin Vinny, which will, you won't quite get to it. You'll get around it in a couple of years. A genre performance that is so undeniable and kind of broad, right? That there was no choice. There was not that there was no choice. Obviously, there's a plethora of wonderful choices, but I think that adds a certain element to it, because
it's an X factor.
It felt undeniable. Like, we don't normally vote for this kind of thing, but look at what this woman is doing.
Look at the material.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Julia Roberts, A Star is Born, before our eyes, getting in for a sort of, like a standard mainstream romantic comedy that probably wasn't written with Oscars in mind, but she got it and became this pop culture force. Meryl Streep in her comedy era in a movie that I absolutely love. Anjelica Huston really taking on this very challenging role and nailing it as far as I'm concerned. And then we have that, the legend Joanne Woodward in a very subtle performance in a film with her husband, and I think very much outshining him. I think it's a great category, and I'm happy that we're kicking off the 90s with a really good one.
Yeah, you're kicking it off with a banger for sure.
Yeah.
It's funny because I do love your podcast and I love actresses. I'm a gay man, so I love actresses.
Welcome.
That's
Welcome to And the Runner-Up
that's what
Is.
we do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so as I'm, you put up those polls about the 80s winners, and so many of those years, you're looking at like it's some of them are such a shoulder shrug beyond the winner, and even like Sissy Spacek and something called River Country.
The River.
Yeah, The River.
Yes.
Jessica Lange, the best actor. Oh my God, poor Jessica Lange, the best actress that we have to have the worst Oscar nominations. Like that.
I know.
And now you're entering into the 90s, and I feel like, maybe it's because it's a little bit more recent, but I think what was being nominated and what was being honored gets a little bit more fun and a little bit more diverse. I mean, diverse in a plethora of performances, we know, not diverse in many other ways. But so few, not so few, but I think I would say on the whole, less movies that don't exist in the 90s being nominated for Best Actress than in the 80s.
This is very true. We definitely suffered through quite a few movies that don't exist.
Tough.
And I look back on them and I'm like, did I actually watch that? Like, I recall so little of that entire Farm Girl year of
You're
1984.
Oh, thank God for Goldie Hawn and Private Benjamin.
Yes, an oasis in the desert, truly. Alrighty, let's kick this off, shall we?
Yes, please. Let's do it.
Let's do it.
Can't wait.
All right. We're starting off with Anjelica Huston in The Grifters. So Anjelica Huston gets her one and only lead Oscar nomination here, and it's a pretty damn good one. But by this point, she is an Oscar winner for Prizzi's Honor in 1985, but that was in supporting actress, so we didn't talk about her. She also gets another supporting nomination in 89 for Enemies: A Love Story. But just to back up and introduce her a little bit, Anjelica Huston is part of the famous Huston family. Her grandfather was Walter Huston. Her father was John Huston. So she was born into the film industry, essentially. She had an early role when she was 14 in her father's film, A Walk with Love and Death, but that was not a great experience for her, so she went into modeling after that for most of the 70s. Then she decided to seriously pursue acting in the 80s in smaller roles in things like The Postman Always Rings Twice and Frances, which we talked about for Jessica Lange. This is Spinal Tap, The Ice Pirates, and then her big breakthrough comes with Prizzi's Honor, which is this great standout role. She looks incredible in that film on top of everything else. And she's just showered with awards for that, including the Oscar. And after that, in addition to Enemies: A Love Story, she had The Dead, she had Crimes and Misdemeanors, she was in the miniseries Lonesome Dove, and then this same year, 1990, she's also the star of The Witches, so it's a prime time for Anjelica Huston, plus the fact that she's in this kind of high-profile relationship with Jack Nicholson right until around the time of The Grifters being filmed, so there's a lot going on in Anjelica's world right now, so she's really thriving. And for The Grifters, according to Anjelica, she was not the first choice. They actually wanted Melanie Griffith for this role, but she turned it down and they went to Anjelica, who was kind of concerned about some of the content of the film, some of the more explicit qualities, you could say, but she was persuaded to take it on anyway and to get this chance to work with Stephen Frears, who's just coming off his own success with Dangerous Liaisons. The Grifters, it's based on the novel of the same name, and it tells the story of Lily Dillon, played by Anjelica, an experienced con artist who works for the mob, making bets at horse races to rig the system, essentially, and one day she stops to see her son, Roy, played by John Cusack, who's also getting into the grifting business, but she tries to dissuade him of going down the same career path as her. He just got beat up while he was trying to grift someone. So he's staying at the hospital, where she meets Roy's new girlfriend, Myra, played by Annette Bening, who's also a grifter, who she does not take a liking to, thinking she's a bad influence for her son. And things really spiral from there after Lily's boss becomes furious with her for missing a job while she was attending to her son and proceeds to abuse her. And that kind of causes her to lay low while Myra is planning this scheme that will just have disastrous consequences. So fun movie to talk about here to start off with. Thoughts on Miss Anjelica Huston and this prime period of her career and her performance here?
Well, what's so funny about Anjelica Huston, if you're somebody like me who grew up in the 80s and 90s, is that it wasn't until I sort of looked back at her filmography that this is sort of like an anointment period, because she just seems like somebody who's always been famous. Like, for all practical purposes, Prizzy's Honor is like really, her third or fourth major role, and she wins an Oscar. And then 1990, she's sort of being anointed as a movie star, where it sort of just felt like she was always that way. And looking back on it, it's really, really interesting that she wasn't. I saw The Grifters for the first time probably when I was 10. Some of it has never left me.
I can imagine.
And my therapist are working through that. Can't look at oranges the same way. Trying to pay my rent, but through my bank account every month is, difficult, because I know that there are other options. And so I hadn't seen it in so long, because I was like a huge movie person my entire life. This is the first actually Oscars that I remember. And by remember, I mean, I remember waking up the next day and asking my dad who won, because I had fallen asleep. I certainly didn't watch this movie because Anjelica Huston was nominated. But I don't know, I guess I stumbled upon it. And even then I was like, this is a good movie. Like, this is a good movie. And I probably now haven't seen it in 25 years. And it is a really good movie. Anjelica Huston in this movie is, like you said, just like firing on all cylinders, somebody who kind of knows that this is their moment and is taking it, sort of. Annette Bening is kind of A Star is Born, is having that same A Star is Born moment in this movie, and she's phenomenal. I'm not a big John Cusack guy. He once blocked me on Twitter because I made fun of him during the World Series, and I thought that was,
oh man,
yeah, that was, but also like a claim to fame. So
I guess so, yeah.
But she's just so great from the aspects of it, where like that incestuous sort of relationship she has with her son. You can just tell by the way they're interacting that, like, oh, this was in a lesser movie, right? There would have been that scene about like, well, you abused me, you did this, you did that. And there's none of that. And it's all sort of left to her to kind of convey all of that, like, I did the best I could sort of feeling, and the best I could may have been to molest you. So it is an amazing performance that I don't think we talk enough about in like the pantheon of bad moms.
Yeah, she is one of the bad moms.
She's a bad mom. Her, yeah. Kristen Bell, Kathryn Hahn.
Yes.
Me.
She should have been in
Who's the other one?
Bad Moms Christmas.
Yes. Oh my God, she should have been one of
Mila
the moms.
Kunis?
Yeah, she should have been one of the moms in Bad Moms Christmas. And then like 15 gay men on Twitter would have been like, here's why this is funny.
Yeah, exactly. I really like Anjelica Huston. Obviously, I think she's just such a magnetic performer. Her voice, especially as she's gotten older too, is so evocative. You could definitely see why she's doing quite a bit of voice acting in her later years. Love all her collaborations with like Wes Anderson. Also, let's not forget her work on Smash.
Couldn't if I wanted to.
But exactly. But yes, her work, especially in this period, is fantastic. Certainly The Witches, the two Addams Family movies. Like, she's just so well cast in these roles, I think. And she really makes great use of her very evocative qualities. And I think she just brings a level of drama and like gravitas that I always find appealing. And The Grifters is actually a movie that I hadn't seen before this.
You didn't watch it when you were 10?
Spots. I was 0 years old in 1990.
All right,
so
okay, all right.
I'm just being honest, okay? But it's another one of those that I've been definitely meaning to watch, but this finally gave me an excuse to do so. Really loved it, and As I said a few episodes, as people know, I'm a huge fan of Dangerous Liaisons, and this I think is a perfect follow-up to that in terms of just really centering on like these three characters with this great female performance at the center that's so entrancing and gets to be like morally complex and dark. But it's like, because of the actors playing them, in that case Glenn Close, in this case Anjelica Huston, you do feel this like strange connection to them because they're just such well-rounded performers that they find the nuance and they find an in to their characters, I think.
I know that you are maybe a little bit more familiar with this, but Glenn Close and Stephen Frears, did they have a good relationship on the set of Dangerous Liaisons? Or do you know?
I didn't read anything negative about
let's
it.
assume,
So.
because I wonder what it would be like if they continued their partnership. Because you could see 1990 Glenn Close in this role.
1,000%.
You know,
yes.
I will say that although I think Anjelica Huston is amazing and revelatory in some ways, and what a run she's having. Crimes and Misdemeanors, Enemies of Love Story, Oscar nomination, The Witches, The Grifters, Addams Family. Like, that's a solid few years. I do think it's a performance that is not singular to her, and that you could kind of like when you said Melanie Griffith was going to be in that role, I think she's too young, especially at this point. You could see her at this point in her career maybe being the Annette Bening, a little bit older than John Cusack. You know, the voice that it's almost like the voice that Annette Bening is doing is a Melanie Griffith
coded.
Melanie Griffith now, I would love to see doing something like this, but you could sort of fan cast that Grifters role with actresses of the time and imagine them doing well, where maybe when we'll get to it with Misery, there are all these other actresses who are in line and all these other actors, and you kind of go, no, it had to be Kathy Bates and James Caan.
No, that's true. What do we think of her as a blonde? Because we don't often see her as blonde.
I was watching with my fiance, and he, you know, an avowed fan of Drag Race, screamed every time she came on screen with that from that wig. I mean, it's so, but it's so perfect. Like, and because to your point, like, because you conjure her in your mind, you're probably thinking of Morticia Addams, like the first sort of thing.
Oh, yeah.
You're certainly thinking of that like jet black hair, and so. To see her as a blonde is wild, but it's so good it's like, you know, she's doing a lot of work, but that wig, she's doing a lot of work too, to give you like halfway to the character.
Best supporting wig. Yes.
And I think it can't be understated that The Witches is this year, and to have a year, because some of the critics prizes she won obviously were like very, you know, The Grifters and The Witches. Really surprised to not see her come up at the Golden Globes for The Witches, because it feels like a perfect Golden Globes double nomination year.
That's true.
But I think also showing that kind of like broad versatility. I mean, they're both sort of villains, right? But they're so villainous in such different ways. You know, I think that certainly helped her towards her nomination, towards, I think, as we'll discuss later, towards the top of probably the top of that heap. I will say something about the Grifters that I did not like, is that I did not understand any of the scams, because I am like not smart. So I was.
You would be grifted by them.
Oh my God, I would be grifted by anyone. But I'm still like, what is she?
Even John Cusack?
That the $20 and $10, nobody's looking at that. Come on. But I still sort of don't understand what the horse racing con is, and I kind of don't need to know. I don't want to know, but I'm like,
it's not important to the story, really. So
no idea what. I just know it's bad, and I know that Bobo did not like it. That's what I know about that.
Yeah, well, and that's all you need to know, really. I think I like that it doesn't get bogged down in the details.
It's a good point, right? Like, that could have been a really a movie called The Grifters could have gotten like really, really in the weeds about grifting, and I don't think any of us needed that.
Right. But I do think all that opening for her is such great setup. But as the film goes on, we see those tiny cracks, just like in Dangerous Liaisons, where the toll of keeping up the lies and, you know, being so distant from her son, all of this stuff is just kind of maybe catching up to her. And it's hard for her to bear at times. And despite all of that hardship and sort of dealing with her abusive boss and being worried for her son, she also does still maintain as much of a cool sort of hardened sensibility as she can, because she can't afford to let any of that weakness show. And it's so contained, I think, in the way that, like, this is, again, jumping way ahead, but you see by the end how she is willing to do whatever it takes to survive, because that's all she knows how to do. I think she says at one point that, like, she's been doing this since she was 18 or something. So, it's just totally instinct, using her smarts, doing what's necessary to get the job done, even if it means sacrificing a personal relationship with her son and all this other stuff. It's kind of a haunting performance, and it's one that I think has really stayed with me in the days since I've watched it, especially for that final scene. It's just the level of operatic kind of emotion that she goes to in the end is just really striking.
Yeah, she unravels in that movie so subtly, I think.
Mm-hmm.
You very much get a picture of like how this woman survived all those years. And it's not by doing things probably to the extreme that she's had to do them, but maybe getting as close. But I think it is, you get from her whatever it takes to survive. And like in this case, it took a lot to survive and make it through. And you kind of know that about her before the end of the movie with, with what she has to ultimately do. What do you make of their relationship? Do you think they were,
Yeah. Well, I will say that I did read that, like, Anjelica Huston said that her and John Cusack had, like, a lot of off-screen chemistry, just as they were filming it. And I do think that you can very much see that in the film, because they aren't, like, super maternal son feeling when you watch their scenes. And they're, like, maybe 15 years apart in terms of age. But I don't know. I think it's there, obviously, and we're supposed to notice it. And I do think that it lays the breadcrumbs well to set up what everyone is probably thinking by the end. So,
yeah.
in that sense, I think it's well written, in that it does build you up to that point of being like, well, of course she's gonna take this drastic action that she takes in the end, that might make people uncomfortable, but could also make people be like, well, there it is, I knew it. I also did want to just note her relationship with Annette Bening. All of the few scenes that they have together, I think, are just really fun, because she kind of looks like it causes Lily to kind of judge her, the way that Annette Bening kind of carries herself, and assumes that she is, let's just say, a woman of loose morals. And Myra saying that, oh, she's a friend of her son, and Lily being like, I bet you're a lot of people's
Yeah.
friends. Like, all those little bitchy moments, I think, are really fun from her. It's very old school Hollywood film noir, and it does come across as authentic, I think, rather than feeling like pastiche, or like she's just putting on a costume. Like, she just is this person. I just love the scenes that they share together.
Yeah, I agree. Have they done anything together since? I don't think so, right?
I don't know. I can't think of
Nothing
anything.
that is
No.
coming immediately to mind, but they're such a good pair of deep voiced, strong
Mm-hmm.
broads. I think like they both give broad in this movie.
Yeah.
I would love to.
But Annette is not doing her deep voice. She's mostly doing like that higher
But
pitch.
when she yells at him, she goes into the lower register. So I do like
Yes.
that she's doing a voice as the character's doing a voice. You know what I mean? Like it's
Yeah.
and that
The
I
layers.
loved.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Another great moment I wanted to mention for Angelica is when we have this scene at a restaurant, and a guy starts kind of bothering her, and she literally elbows him, I think, in the throat. That feels very much like sort of wish fulfillment of, like, every woman who's ever had to deal with a guy like that would just, like, want to take care of business like that. I just love those little sort of pulpier moments.
And the waitress in that moment
Mm.
is
Mm-hmm.
um I always forget her name, but I certainly, of course, was not looking at my phone. I would never look at my phone and watch a movie. Prove that I did.
Good boy.
Um, but maybe I looked up because I'm like, I heard that voice of the mom from While You Were Sleeping. I
Mm.
always forget her name, is the waitress in that scene. And I loved that.
Mm-hmm.
It was definitely a movie where people kept on popping up, right? Like Xander Berkeley's in
Yeah,
it, Steve
one of those.
Tobolowsky is
Right.
in it.
Like, hey, that guy.
Paul
Yep.
Adelstein and Jeremy Piven are two of the sailors. I mean, it's
Yeah, that was interesting.
contractually obligated that Jeremy Piven will be in a John Cusack movie, every John Cusack movie. It's very unsettling.
Yeah. And of course, Pat Hingle playing Bobo.
Pat
The
Hingle,
boss.
like a year after he's Commissioner Gordon, playing Bobo is wild.
The range.
The range. Your
Yes.
fave couldn't be there.
Yeah, I think obviously, again, to go back to the third act, I love all the wild twists and turns that we have in that third act of her just being in self-preservation mode. And it's like her instincts do end up being right about Annette Bening's character, because like she's spying on her at the racetracks and finds out that Lily is like stealing money from her boss. And, you know, the Annette Bening character is kind of jealous of her relationship with her son and straight up saying that it's probably like an incestuous thing, and ends up telling the boss about the money stuff, which obviously makes him mad. And then all this stuff with like when Annette Bening finally goes to the motel and tries to steal the money, that confrontation. I love just how that whole sequence plays out, because then we cut away from it. Of course, we don't actually see the killing, whatever it may be, until John Cusack is having to identify his mother's body. And it's like, oh, wait, did Anjelica Huston just die off screen? What is this movie?
Yeah.
And of course, we get the reveal that when he looks at the hand and it doesn't have the burn mark from the cigar that Bobo had put on her, that is like an identifying feature. But of course, he doesn't say anything. And then the reveal of her rummaging through his apartment, like all that is just really well done. That's not having anything to do with her performance, but just as a first time watcher, I was like along for this ride. I was just like, what do we got next?
You can understand why Stephen Frears got like sort of that outlier director nomination, just for like the sequences and the way that he did it, or even just the cigar, you know, from Bobo, because it's not necessarily something you think is going to come back up, because it's just a sign of the, you know, the abuse, right? Right. You know, he's just, that's like a, you know, a mobster move. And the fact that it came up again as something to identify is really smart. The actress's name from While You Were Sleeping, who played the waitress in The Grifters, in that scene, is Nicole Mercurio.
Thank you.
It was bothering me.
Yeah, but like all that revealing of like she killed Myra and staged it as a suicide. And then I feel like there's also this like sort of icky other layer to it, and how like I feel like both her and Myra have like similar haircuts. So it's like she was kind of able to do that. And like, what does that say about John Cusack's character? Like, is he attracted to his mother in a way?
I mean, I think yes. I think the answer is yes.
Just like,
I'm gonna say,
you know, we're building the evidence as we're watching the film in moments like that.
And she's a little older, Annette Bening, than him. Like, I think, you know, John Cusack is a baby in this movie. He's a year out from Say Anything, right? Where he's playing a high school student. He's 20. He's 20. I don't even know if he's 25 when this movie is, you know, when this movie is out. But I think it works so well that she's like just old enough and not playing, you know, she's not an older actress who's older than John Cusack, who's playing younger. She's playing that she's a little bit older than him, which also feeds into that whole thing. I mean,
the Freudian stuff.
Speaking of the 90s, you'll have plenty of opportunity to talk about Annette Bening in the coming shows.
Yes, it's true. We'll check in on her every like 5-10 years or so. Yes. So like that, again, that whole ending sequence I think is really well done, and where like that 2 or 3 seconds where everything just goes wrong and there's just so much going on, and her grief and her panic I think is really raw and again very operatic to me. But then it's like, she's just gonna collect that money and
gotta go,
getting the hell out of Dodge. It's very Shakespearean.
Yeah, because you're right. In that last scene, she is sort of like trying everything with him, right? She's trying to seduce him. She's trying to like say like, I'm your mom, help me. You know, she's, you know, I don't know if I actually don't remember if she says, if she uses like a come with me, but she just sort of tell him to get out of the game. You know, like, I'm being protective of you. I need you because, you know, we're in love. I need you because you're my son. Okay, none of that worked. I'm going to murder you. You know, the way you communicate with the loved one.
Yeah, it's just a really great femme fatale kind of performance that, for me, like, even if it could very easily fall into pastiche, it doesn't feel like that. It feels like she's creating this very morally flawed character. at the end of the day. He was three-dimensional. And even if it does feel like an archetype kind of character, she does find those little tiny moments where that facade starts to crack a little bit. But then she collects herself again and just survives. That's what it is. So I love this performance. I think it's, like we were saying, so underrated from this lineup especially.
Agreed.
So anything else on Anjelica?
No, I think other than like, I think it's sort of a shame that she doesn't have as many opportunities after this to do something this, or nothing. I shouldn't say that. It's more that nothing lands the way this does. Probably after this, I do think she's riding on such a high after this that there are whispers of like a, crazy kind of Morticia Addams Oscar nomination, sort of like that's how big she is and how big this performance is. But nothing really lands like this, for a while after that, probably until Royal Tenenbaums. The rest of her 90s is a little, is a mixed bag, we could say. Of course, should she have been Oscar nominated and won in 1998 for Baroness Romea de Ghent in Ever After? Of course. I mean, everyone thinks that. But,
we're always saying this.
So that's the only thing I would say about Anjelica Huston. I think like this was I think Prizzy's Honor, Crimes and Misdemeanor, Enemies of Love Story, Oscar nomination. This is sort of like and then Blockbuster after that, right? A big, huge, fat hit.
Right.
If in those years after that, which of course, like she's now over 40, it's the 90s, she's an actress. Unfortunately, those roles are not there, but where she was going to level up to like a Meryl and Glenn Close, like that, Jessica Lange, like that kind of level of actress from this realm. And I think she does have that gravitas. I think that's what we think of her as, but the roles don't align with that.
Yeah. Maybe that people didn't know what to do with her exactly. So it
feels
tough.
like Witches, Grifters, Addams Family are like the three best kind of broad uses of like, this is how you should use Anjelica Huston. I do think she was great in 50-50. I was hoping for like a last, a supporting actress nomination there. I think she was sort of 7th or 8th in that race.
And I think there's still hope that we could get a maybe, if not lead, then at least another supporting nomination late in life for Anjelica.
I think that's what I mean. Like, I think that she's the kind of actress who, like, when you think of her as like somebody who could and should have 3 Oscars. Like that's the air that she's breathing.
Yeah. Well, going to a more rarefied air next, let us talk about Miss Julia Roberts in Pretty Woman. This is certainly a big deal that we have here. Julia Roberts, one of the biggest stars in the world, and this was her true, like I said, Star is Born moment. But before Pretty Woman, Julia came from Georgia, and she moved to New York to study acting, and it's really remarkable to look back and just see how few credits she even had before Pretty Woman. Like, she did a few TV guest spots. She had her sort of indie breakthrough with Mystic Pizza. Not that that made a lot of money, but it definitely put her on the map enough to get that role in Steel Magnolias the next year, alongside a great group of women, Sally Field, Shirley MacLaine, Dolly Parton, great company to be in. But she emerged as the only one to get the Oscar nomination for it in Best Supporting Actress, and she also wins a Golden Globe for that. So obviously a big moment for her. But then Pretty Woman was her first proper leading lady star kind of role, and her chance to really graduate to the big leagues. And clearly she knocked it out of the park, became a superstar, and it's wild to look back and see just how much money this movie made. 460 million worldwide. It was one of the highest grossing domestic releases of the year, right behind Home Alone, Ghost, and Dances with Wolves. This is where I'll just say, take me back to a time when a romantic comedy can make that much money and be one of the highest grossing movies of the year. But yes, Pretty Woman, it was originally conceived as a much darker film that really explored like the themes of sex work and was like a cautionary tale. But then when it went over to Touchstone Pictures, which was a Disney company, it was rewritten as a much lighter, wider appealing romantic comedy. And as you can expect, a lot of women were in the mix to play this part. I'll just list off a few for you. Karen Allen, Molly Ringwald, Winona Ryder, Drew Barrymore, Patricia Arquette, Brooke Shields, Uma Thurman, Meg Ryan, Michelle Pfeiffer, Jennifer Jason Leigh, Daryl Hannah, Leah Thompson, and yeah, quite a few turned it down, especially when they saw that it was going to be more of a romantic comedy than what it originally was. But obviously, Julia gets the part. She was only 21, and Steel Magnolias hadn't even come out yet. So I would say it was kind of a risk for the studio, but she really seized the opportunity. So Pretty Woman is about a businessman, a corporate raider named Edward Lewis, played by Richard Gere, who drives through Los Angeles after a party and ends up in the red light district where he meets Vivian Ward, played by Julia, who's a sex worker, and they have sex that night and then they kind of both find themselves attracted to each other and want to spend more time with each other. Problem for Edward is that Vivian is a little crass and free-spirited and not quite the traditional kind of lady that's expected among Edward's circle. So she makes an effort to ingratiate herself and learn the customs to be a more refined sort of person, soften the edges. So yes, let us talk this moment for Julia Roberts. What are your thoughts? I mean, you've already kind of talked about it, just on Julia as this enduring star and this performance, and whether you think the film still holds up, because there's always discourse about that, wherever you want to start.
I mean, perfect film, 10-10, no notes.
Okay, there we go.
Sure, are some of the sexual politics in it very 1990? Did this season on The Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, one of, Dorit's husband, PK, take her on a Pretty Woman date, and that was received very poorly because he was saying his wife was a sex worker? Yes. But sure. I can't think of a movie that brings me more joy.
Wow.
It may be my favorite movie of all time. No,
Whoa, boy.
E.T. is my favorite movie of all time. E.T. is my absolute favorite movie of all time. But Pretty Woman, I watched Pretty Woman so much that I'm 100 years old. The VHS case cracked. It was just just makes me so happy. I don't watch it as much anymore because, I'm an adult now. But I also think, like, you mention it, but it's hard to put into context how big a deal this movie was, like how huge this movie was, that up until the release of Ghost and Home Alone later that year, how big a year 1990 was, right? Like what a massive box office year 1990 was. But until those movies came out, this was like the 5th highest grossing movie worldwide of all time. Like it was a phenomenon. And I'm 9 years old when this movie comes out, and it's reached the playground. Do you know what I mean? Like it's a hard R romantic comedy. And, we're like on the monkey bars being like, remember when she laughed?
What a moment.
Yeah. And I will say, it is such a joyful performance. I love a movie star performance. I don't think, and I don't think we give enough credit to those kind of things. And I think when the Academy even gives less, right? That's why this nomination was so undeniable, that she just like, we're really seeing something here. We're really watching something here. And then what the trajectory that this put her on, making her like this huge, massive star. I mean, a year later, Sleeping with the Enemy, which is in some ways, maybe her best performance. We can't go into it. I could talk about this forever. Is $100 million hit. It's not that good. It's not that good of a movie. And the poster is just her face. Like that's how big a star she was. Like that's like Tom Cruise in the 80s and 90s level star. But the thing about Vivian is she's so charming. She's so lovely. She's not nominated because she's funny and she laughs and she tells, the women, the shop owners or shop workers on Rodeo Drive that they made a big mistake and not letting her shop there.
Huge, in fact.
Yeah, it was both big and huge, the mistake. Yes, we love that the escargot slipped out of her fork and, slippery little suckers. But it's those like, she has the great monologue there at the end. When I was a little girl, my mama used to lock me in the attic when I was bad, which is pretty often. I could do the whole thing, but I won't because I'm a professional.
Fair enough.
She has to nail that monologue. It's not the world's
Hmm.
most complicated monologue. It's not Shakespeare, but she has to give Vivian that. Like, she has to give her that interiority. And, you know, when she's talking about not kissing on the mouth right now, yes, it's very cliche. It's very, it's become very, like eye rolly now when you see something like that happen. But in 1990, she has to nail that. And so she does, and she does it so giddily and joyfully. And I don't think that the Oscars anoint movie stars enough, like, or appreciate when that happens. And sometimes it happens with, say, like on the totally opposite end of the spectrum, with like a Timothy Chalamet nomination for Call Me by Your Name, right? Like,
Hmm.
this is a star, and we want you to know that we're putting our stamp on him from the beginning. But not enough of this. Like 5 years later, Sandra Bullock, I can't believe I'm evoking While You Were Sleeping twice on this podcast, is in While You Were Sleeping. It's a big, huge hit. And because of this, same studio as Pretty Woman, they want to mount a Oscar campaign, and Sandra Bullock is like, I'm good. You don't need to, I don't need an Oscar campaign for While You Were Sleeping. Um, but those kind of roles, those kind of like movie star moments, I don't think are appreciated enough. And I think it goes to show how good she is in this movie, and how big it was, that it was, again, sort of like Kathy Bates in Misery, like undeniable.
Absolutely.
I love her
Love
so
that.
much.
That is clear based on that. No, but this is one of those movies where, and don't take offense to it, but like as long as I don't think too hard about like what it all means about like materialism and all this stuff, and how like maybe she's changing a lot of herself for him and hoping he'll save her and all this stuff. As long as I just think of this as like an adult fairy tale,
Please don't think. I
like
mean, please don't think about it. None of us should.
yes, right. And as long as you don't really look beneath the surface too much, I think it's really fun and charming. And almost all of it, I think, has to do with Julia, who I have also loved for decades now. Ever since I was a kid, my mother loved Julia Roberts, and I feel like she was always kind of like on the TV, like always watching her movies, seeing all the tabloid coverage, even. So, like, she was very present in my childhood. I feel like she was one of the first actors that I really understood to be like, oh, Julia Roberts, that's a movie star. Like, she was like the one I would go to. And I think for that reason, I have always felt a connection with her and a soft spot. And it's just been really interesting to watch her journey since Pretty Woman and being the queen of rom coms and having her big Oscar moment with Aaron Brockovich, and then taking on some more challenging work and things like Closer and even like August Osage County. And so, I think looking at this performance with adult eyes now, I'm just kind of in awe of what she's able to do and how clear it was, I think, that she was always going to be a movie star after this. Like, there was never any doubt. She just has this incredible charisma, and you cannot teach that. I just find myself getting more and more sort of comfortable with her as the film goes on. Just watching it now, I'm just like falling in love with her as much as Richard Gere is in that moment. There's some sort of nervousness in the beginning which I think is intentional in showing how Vivian isn't necessarily comfortable with her life as a sex worker. She knows what she's doing, and she has like a bit of experience, so it's not like she's playing like a total like I don't know what I'm doing kind of thing. But she's got the red coat and the blonde bob and the black hat. It's very distinct, like 1990, and her makeup makes her features look even bigger, like her eyes and the lip. It's quite an image to start with, but it's obviously part of the character. And you can imagine like this girl from Georgia now in Hollywood really wanting to stand out and create a distinct look, even if it doesn't maybe suit her as much. And then once she meets Edward, we just see this cool, easy breezy personality. And you would never know that Julia, this actress who's still on the rise, only has like a handful of roles under her belt, and we also see that like as Vivian takes pride in, not being beholden to anyone, not having to answer to anyone. She likes her freedom. And I think Julia just naturally has that willful sort of personality that really works for a character like this. No nonsense, very frank with her words, not shy at all. and just doesn't have much like self-consciousness with just putting herself out there. I love, even outside of those bigger moments that everyone always talks about, you know, we have things like that fun bit when they go to the hotel for the first time and they're waiting for the elevator, and like she's showing a lot of skin, and she talks about having like a run in her pantyhose or something just to, you know, shock the other people waiting for the elevator, and she's like, wait, I'm not wearing any, you know. And those moments, like, it doesn't come across as like obnoxious or ditzy or anything like that. Like, it's very strangely kind of girl next door, even while being like a hooker at the same time. And so it's just a really like a much more difficult performance, I think, looking at it now, than I ever even thought of it as, because she just makes it look so easy, you know.
That's the thing about, I think, this performance, or rather I'll say this Oscar nomination, I do think it was a little eye rolly at the time, and probably for a while later. You know, of course,
Yeah.
we anoint, you know, we lift up a woman, and then we're like, and then the 90s were about, you know, every Hollywood trying to bring her down, and she said, no thank you,
Yeah.
I'll be fine.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that it is one that holds up so well.
Yeah.
You look back on it now
Yeah.
and you go, of course she should have been nominated for Pretty Woman. You know, even if the movie hasn't held up as well, beyond, I think you're exactly right. Like, as a fairy tale, especially from Disney, you know, it's sort of, they're, you know, it's, you know, it's not that long of a leap from Ariel to, you know, like the Disney princesses
Yeah.
of the time, to Julia Roberts, you know, again, sort of on a balcony giving a monologue, asking a prince to come save her. It's not that far from where that is. But the and I think also because they just don't exist anymore. You know, I mean, I'm gonna sound like the oldest old man in the world. They just don't make them like this anymore, you know. And both,
Don't make them like they used to.
I
Yep.
mean, both like this movie and this kind of performance and this kind of actor, it just doesn't hit the same way because it doesn't exist as much. Or even just the idea of, oh, well, now we're in love with Julia Roberts and Richard Gere, and 10 years later we're going to go see them in a different movie, and that's also going to make $150 million, because in an even worse movie, like in an actually bad movie that I've seen 1,000 times because she is so charming and I love seeing them together, is, you know, now a thing, you know. And
Yeah.
it's commercial, but like in a way that isn't bad. Like, that isn't a bad word, I guess, when you thinking about just the joy of this performance. And I think it goes back to what I said earlier about why I love her 2000 win so much for Erin Brockovich. It's the exact continuation of this performance to Erin Brockovich, a better movie, a better role, and better tricks up her sleeve. But it's not you know, she didn't win in 1995 for Mary Riley, you know, like that kind of sort of
Mary Riley.
that sort of dour kind of, like, that's not
Right.
her thing. And now I think you're right. These last 10 years of her career are so much more interesting. Ben is Back, you said Closer, you know, August Osage County, you know, these kind of movies, even Leave the World Behind, right? She's so brittle and so not this. And yeah, now this is what we want from her. You know, she's been the most bankable actress in the world. She's won her Oscar. She's gotten the follow-up nomination, all of that. And now she's like, well, now I want to do whatever I want to do. And you're welcome. I'll save rom-coms by being in a rom-com with George Clooney.
Yeah, Take It to Paradise, which was fine.
Which was fine.
Nice yeah.
I'm glad it exists more than I liked it.
Sure. Yes. I like that it's there in theory.
Have I seen it 30 times? Of course I have. Of course.
Oh boy.
I'm a broken person.
You're just watching these Julie Roberts movies on a loop.
Oh, I mean, just
I love it.
nothing like, she just really brings me a lot of joy. And I think she must have brought the Academy a lot of joy. And also, what I think is interesting about Pretty Woman, too, as a movie, is that it was WGA nominated, which is wild. Like, I think some of that is because of how big of a hit it was. I mean, granted, 1990 was the year that Ghost won Best Screenplay. And I love Ghost. Is it a good movie? I don't know.
Who's to say?
Is it fun? Sure. Is it the best written movie of 1990? I'm gonna say no. I'm gonna confidently say that it was not, I mean, the competition that year was a little bit, interesting.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
Pretty Woman was appreciated, I guess. She was BAFTA nominated. She was like,
Mm-hmm.
it was appreciated in different realms in ways that you wouldn't expect.
Right. And it does only get the one Oscar nomination, which is something that I forgot to mention, is that we have, I think, like 3 sole nominees from this lineup, which I think maybe all 3 movies maybe deserve a little bit more, but
Yeah, and
we'll talk
Postcards
about
from
that
the
later.
Edge's second nomination is for song,
Is for song.
which is
Yeah.
wild that it's not for, say, adapted screenplay or supporting actress, but
Hashtag where is Shirley.
where
Yes.
we'll get into that shortly, I'm sure.
Yes. I also want to talk about how I think one of the strengths of her performance is in making us believe that this a little bit jaded woman who goes through the motions of her job and doesn't get emotionally attached, she doesn't kiss on the mouth, will then become so attached to Edward. And no offense to Richard Gere, but there is kind of an aloof quality to him as an actor sometimes that could make it a little tough to sell the idea of her falling in love with him. But I don't know. I know some people would disagree, but I do think he brings a certain weird chemistry that is very Richard Gere that I kind of believe it anyway. The idea of her falling in love with him. I think he does have a little bit of that sensitivity in this film, even though he's playing like a corporate asshole. Maybe it's just the kind of loving looks that he gives her that makes you feel like you understand why she would like him in return and see him as a little bit different from all the other guys she knows, and how he treats her like a princess, quite literally, and not in a infantilizing way. I think he seems to really respect her and find some commonalities there. I think, so many scenes, I think like one like at the piano bar, I think is one that I find kind of touching, because they don't really have to say much, but there is this great erotic charge there. You just kind of go with it, and you feel it, even if intellectually you're like, I don't know about the dynamics of this still feels a little wonky, but like it's kind of hot anyway.
Yeah.
So you just go with it.
Yeah, it is funny because I don't think Gary Marshall is the most erotic filmmaker that we have.
A fair take.
The man himself, very sexy.
He's no Adrian Lyne.
Yeah.
Right.
But that is like a really sexy scene. And I think that what she does so well, in contrast to Richard Gere, is play both of those kind of, both of those colors of, and actually with Hector Elizondo too, that kind of person that you want to take care of but can take care of themselves, but also person that you want to date but also like person you want to have sex with on like a piano. I think that I think it's the dynamics between, she creates that chemistry with those actors, and then those actors, I think, volley it back. It also perfect that he's a little bit older, right? She's
yes. Mm-hmm.
And that really works, and that what he's looking for would be somebody who is like, I can stand on my own 2 feet and I want more than you're able to give me. And that shift that he's made from that first conversation that he has breaking up with his girlfriend, who literally says she wants more, and he's like, no thank you, I'm gonna go get a sex worker for the week, to the end of the week, I think tracks. And maybe I'm Pretty Woman pilled, but I do think it's him, it's her, it's their dynamic together. And I think if one of those pieces is off, the whole movie falls apart, even maybe more so than it does under close scrutiny.
Right. No, I think that's very true.
And she's funny. I think that that's also, I would consider 3 of these Oscar nominated roles to be comedic performances.
Yep, I know you're including Misery in that.
I mean, and like Joanne Woodward is not doing satirical work, and
she has her moments,
right?
Yeah.
But she's funny, and like obviously this is a comedy performance, but I think if you're scaling it on like romantic comedy level, I think that she's leaning more into the comedy and nailing the comedy. It's a more comedic performance than a romantic performance, I guess. And that I think that she really nails that.
She is such a natural, and it's again one of those things you really can't teach, even in those more iconic moments that everyone always talks about. Big mistake, big, huge. You know, the way she kind of like shrugs off that like huge. Things like that are just so distinct and original that like there's a reason why people haven't forgotten that.
Also, it's interesting to say that like she, she's the rom-com queen, right? But at this time, it's really Meg Ryan. Meg Ryan is going from When Harry Met Sally to Sleepless in Seattle to, You've Got Mail, unimpeachable classics. But Julia Roberts isn't doing another romantic comedy until I Love Trouble in 1994, which is a disaster. And then,
Yeah, that's
solid
interesting.
double in 95 for Something to Talk About, a movie that I think is like very underrated, but like really isn't coming back to this until 97 with My Best Friend's Wedding. But she is sort of at the same time you know this rom-com queen, but the hits that she has after this movie are thrillers, Sleeping with the Enemy and Pelican Brief. Dying Young was not a huge hit, but like a weepy, horror with Flatliners, Hook,
Hook.
where she's,
Yep.
Tinkerbell. It's not like she didn't really do comedy successfully for almost, until the end of the decade. And
Yeah.
which
Good
is
point.
interesting. And I think that's by choice, right? I think she wanted to do different things. She didn't want to get pigeonholed, but we would not let her not be pigeonholed. And I remember when she signed on to My Best Friend's Wedding, and it was, a quote that went around with something like, no, 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 it's a rom-com. I have the big hair. It's red. It's curly. You're all going to like it. And of course, even that movie is a little bit more interesting than it needs to be. But I think upon going back to it with this lens of like watching it for the purpose of having this conversation, it is some of the comedy bits that you're like, this is a really great comedic performance. It's not a something else performance that is like happens to be funny. It's a comedic performance that has other elements in it. And I think that she's really good at that.
Yeah. It is the true epitome of a Golden Globe winner for Best Actress in a Comedy or Musical. This is like what you would
100%.
think of,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, their love affair with her sort of, started the year before she wins for Steel Magnolias, which is probably why she got the Oscar nomination. And then,
Mhm.
you know, it's off to the races.
And I do also want to note that she does have good dramatic moments, of course. The way her whole demeanor kind of changes after Edward tells his lawyer, Jason Alexander, about her being a hooker, and like the lawyer approaches her about it and is making advances. I think that's really well done. It's like all the blood kind of like leaves her face in that moment because she realizes, oh, Edward may just be just like the rest of these creeps, if not worse, because he made me believe that I'm more than just a hooker. And their fight after in the hotel and her kind of holding back tears and confronting him, I'm fully on her side in that
Yeah.
moment. you
I
know
That fight is such a great encapsulation of what she's doing in this movie, because it's,
mm,
she's screaming at him. I say who, I say when, I say who. And she's like in this moment of drama that she's nailing, but like there's like that little funny bit that crosses across her face where like, oh shit, I already said that.
right.
That is so great.
I think she just expresses that kind of wounded pride with such an earnestness, and obviously makes him feel like shit because he's been so callous about all this, and he's realizing what he's done and he apologizes. And I love this quiet little moment she has where she just says, "You hurt me, don't do it again."
Yeah.
And it's not in like a sort of pathetic way. It's not like she's just like crawling back to him. She's assertive, and it tracks with the character, I think. So
It's
like, it's so well
mature,
rounded.
right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's like a couple, that got in a fight, and this is how
Mm,
they're making up. Yeah. Again, is somebody being paid to be there? Sure. She didn't take the money
perhaps.
though when she's gonna leave. That never really tracked for me. Middle of the week, in the middle of a fight, she's storming off. She doesn't take the money, but at the end of the week, she's like, "Give me that money. I'm moving with $3,000."
You know who would have taken the money? Anjelica Huston.
Anjelica Huston would have taken the money, and Richard Gere found dead in a ditch.
That's literally probably true. um, Obviously, the red dress necklace moment is iconic for a reason. Um,
I mean, Julia
as
Roberts' laugh is like a
it's right
thing,
there.
right?
Yeah.
It's a something that is evokes memory, like, yes, I can
Hmm.
instantly, it's a joke on 30 Rock, Julia Roberts' laugh. That's pretty iconic. And I think when iconic moments happen like that, and not only in the supporting categories, which is when we usually get, these kind of comedic,
Yeah.
iconic performances, again, it's when somebody, I'm glad that both the performance is so good and that it pierced through the zeitgeist so much that, well, if we're all, conjuring up her laugh, you know, based on a sentence, we should probably nominate her for an Oscar.
Totally. Yeah. And another thing, I just wanted to make another observation. One of my favorite Best Actress tropes, which is a woman being moved at the opera. Um, Cher is the definitive of that, obviously, but, her being visibly moved when she's watching. And of course, the older woman asks if she likes the opera, and her response is just so perfect, of course, you
I mean,
know.
best supporting actress for this movie should have been that vein in Julia Roberts' head. It's doing a lot of acting. She's got that
Yeah.
vein that is like, I am
Hmm.
being moved. And
Yes.
I don't think we talk about it
I
enough.
believe it. I believe it. Yeah. And she says she loved it so much she almost peed her pants. And the woman's just looking at her like, what the hell? I just love how totally uninhibited Julia is here. Like, there's just such a confidence in her abilities to land those comedic beats. The ending, people have had discourse on that as well over the years about how maybe it's a little rushed, maybe it's a little too fairy tale-ish. Again, if I don't think about it too much, it's very romantic. I don't know what you could say,
You know,
It's-
he climbed up the tower, I yeah, I think it's a, yeah, sure, sure, sure. It's a very like a sure, 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 sure. Right. This is
yeah.
fine. Let's move on. Uh with the
Yeah.
ending that Hector Elizondo saying upon Richard Gere returning the necklace, it must be so difficult to let go of something so beautiful. And he's like, I gotta go get her. I,
Mm-hmm.
it's very it's very sure. Okay, yeah, fine.
Yeah.
We
There's also a
This movie's been
interesting
on
sort
for
of
2 hours. It needs to be over.
rape scene with Jason Alexander that gets a little dicey.
And
It's
then like sort of the darkness of her saying after
yeah.
that, why is it that all men know how to hit a girl just right that it feels like her face is going to explode? Did they teach this to you in school? And you're just, I think in a moment like that is like where that's a maybe a Gary Marshall is giving us full rom-com, and in a moment like that he brushes by it so
Mm-hmm.
quickly that she's
Yeah,
clearly
like let's
saying,
unpack that actually.
and Richard Gere says not all guys hit. She's like, well, okay then. And we should maybe sit in this
Yeah.
for a minute, or
Right.
not have that in it. Right.
Right. Yeah, that definitely feels like a remnant of the original screenplay, perhaps.
For sure.
But
Do you think that, considering all of the names that were bandied about for this, is there someone that you think, oh, I would have liked to have seen them take a shot at this?
I really honestly can't see anyone else except Julia Roberts. I know that's a sort of a cop out answer, but I look at the list and, I've heard like Molly Ringwald said that she regretted not
Well,
taking
yeah.
this role. Obviously, would have been interesting to see her and see what that could have done to her career as well. Maybe elevate it even further, perhaps. I don't know. Who else? I mean, Meg Ryan, sure, like, she does this stuff very well. I feel like that might be a little
I think Meg
standard.
Ryan is too. I was about to like do something on camera that nobody on this audio medium would see, but she's too like a what's the word? Like, not flimsy, but she's like so flailing about her comedy.
Flighty. Yeah.
Yeah, that I don't,
Mm,
and she cannot be that, right? She's been great
sure.
in other things, but her romantic comedy mode is,
Yeah.
I don't think, on the wavelength of this movie, but she is the natural one that you go, well, if Meg Ryan was in this, it probably would have been 1990. Meg Ryan was in this on the heels of When Harry Met Sally. Sure, this would be
Yeah.
great.
Yeah. I don't know. Is there anyone else for you that you thought?
I think it's funny because most of those actresses that were involved, or who passed rather, I'd kind of like to see them all in the original gritty 3000, the
Right.
the original version. I would have loved to have seen them all in that, and Julia Roberts. I
Hmm.
would have loved to have seen her do
Oh
that,
yeah.
start her career that way. But I don't want to see any of them in this version of it other than Julia
Yeah.
Roberts.
Yeah. So I mean, love it. I'm a bit of a poptimist in that way, where I do love when there's a convergence of someone who did become such a big star from a big hit that everyone watched and then gets the Oscar nomination for it. I love little moments like that,
Yeah.
that, like you kind of said, we don't get often enough anymore. So anything else on Julia?
I mean, I sure, yeah.
You've said a lot.
So
But
much more on Julia, but I'm gonna put a pin in it.
yes. Okay, let's get to another comedic performance here from Miss Meryl Streep in Postcards from the Edge. So, this is Meryl's 9th Oscar nomination, which, again, is just incredible when you remember she only got her first one in 1978. So, that's 9 Oscar nominations in 13 years. Wow.
Wild.
Yeah, and it is worth noting that after this, we did get a bit of a break through the early 90s until that previously mentioned nomination in The Bridges of Madison County in 95. This is at a time when Meryl was in a reassessment period in her career and trying new things. She had just turned 40, and there was a sense that, the kind of thing Meryl Streep does is the big dramatic period piece, accent work, very traditional sort of thespian, taking her work seriously kind of thing. And she obviously got a lot of acclaim and attention that way, but there was a feeling by the end of the 80s, just generally speaking, that she was becoming a bit predictable or maybe typecast with her role choices in her films. So she did make a concerted effort to prove that she could still, do other things. So this is her in her comedy era, her loose era. We have this and She-Devil, and obviously Death Becomes Her a few years later. And she's really showing that she's not just this untouchable sort of prestige star. And even though Postcards from the Edge is certainly a great part with like dramatic elements to it, it is definitely much looser than what she has established herself as in her screen persona in the performances we've talked about on the show before. So, Postcards from the Edge was originated from the late, great Carrie Fisher, her semi-autobiographical novel, which is loosely based on her relationship with her mother, Debbie Reynolds. And the film is largely about their relationship. So, Meryl plays Suzanne Vale, an actress working in Hollywood who struggles with drug addiction. And she's admitted to the hospital after an overdose. And in order to basically stay on the film that she was working on, she has to go under the care of her mother, Doris, played by Shirley MacLaine, an old Hollywood star who's much more perky and optimistic than Suzanne, and also casts a large shadow. So, that's more or less what the film is about. We'll talk about some other stuff too, but let's talk Miss Meryl Streep. What are your thoughts on the marvelous Meryl Streep and this phase of her career and her performance here?
I love this performance. I love this movie. As I was saying, if 3 of
Mm-hmm.
these movies are in my top 7, this is the 7. But
Oh, okay.
still, of thousands. So I think that that's pretty good.
Pretty good.
She's so funny, but being that this was sort of bookended by She-Devil and Death Becomes Her in a totally different way, in a way that gets you Oscar nominated. I mean, I love Meryl again, big shock. Gay, headline is gay man on podcast says loves Meryl Streep.
It's a prerequisite. Yeah.
And I do think that, again, I remember this era, somewhat, not clearly, but more the end of it than the beginning of it. She made she only made comedies from 89 to 92, right? She-Devil, Defending Your Life, Postcards from the Edge, Defending Your Life, Death Becomes Her. And the Meryl can't do comedy bit was so prevalent in fact that it just came up recently. Something was going around Twitter about how 15 years later, when they were doing Devil Wears Prada, one of the producers didn't want Meryl Streep because she's not funny, even though, I mean, She-Devil has gotten a good reprisal, and it's quite funny, and Meryl is quite funny in it. But sure, maybe that one's a little bit, based on your taste. But Postcards from the Edge, Defending Your Life, and Death Becomes Her are sort of unimpeachable classics and comedy classics, and she is hilarious in all of them. I love funny Meryl, but I do think if you look back on her first run, this is sort of both a entrance into the comedy era, but really a backlash to Meryl, right? You know, the reappraisal didn't come from inside the house. You know, it came from a lot of, by the time she's nominated in 1989 for A Cry in the Dark, A Dingo Ate My Baby is what anybody's taking away from that movie and is very although I do like that performance, especially in her 80s range. I think that's one of her better ones. The pervasive feeling is like enough, right? You know, like enough. And then she pivots to comedy and it's Meryl can't do comedy. And so she is sort of in the desert career wise until, you know, Bridges of Madison County, that's a big hit. You know, she gets the Oscar nomination and then, you know, her 90s are sort of weird. And then she becomes like the most bankable actress in Hollywood for 10 years. But I love Meryl. I love her in this movie.
Yeah. And this is a movie that I forgot just how much I love it. I think her and Shirley MacLaine together is just genius casting, and especially because they both really inhabit these roles so well. I think as sort of analogs of Carrie Fisher and Debbie Reynolds. How Shirley MacLaine wasn't nominated, I will never understand.
I think it's category mix up. I think that
Yeah, I think that's just it.
it feels very like she's nominated for lead at BAFTA. Meryl is not nominated. And so but she's nominated in supporting at the Globes. I think that there's some confusion. It's literally the only thing that I could think of, especially coming for Shirley MacLaine after she's like in the mix for Weezer in Steel Magnolias. I think her, Sally Field, Julia Roberts kind of gets in. It feels like the exact kind of thing she missed in 89 and then like she would definitely get nominated in the next year. So it has to be that because she's so good.
It's like, and it's everything that they would like, you know, in an actress. So, I don't know. Anyway, Meryl, I love that she took this sort of turn in her career at this point of wanting to challenge herself, show her comedic side, get a little looser. And I think she really does also sell that she's not like as Suzanne, she's not playing a Meryl Streep type, you know, even though she's playing an actress. Suzanne is just like this working actress taking parts that aren't that great. And as an actress, like she's all right, nothing too special. And
she's not a star, which I think is like the crux of the movie. And she plays that so well. You know, she's probably moderately talented actress who is maybe getting some like Nepo baby treatment, you know, like that's the thing that gave her the leg up. And she likes it, but she doesn't love it. And she could and you get the feeling that she could have she could do this for another 30 years and be fine, but she's not a star. And I think that is so wonderfully portrayed by her because Shirley's doing everything, right? Like Shirley's giving star and she has to, but like Meryl is not giving. She could have played it as like, I'm a star and I'm being, my light is being dimmed by my mother, which is part of the story, of course. But it's sort of like, I know I'm not this. Like, I know I'm not what you are, or what my mom is. And she's playing that as like, I know that, she knows that. And like, she's overbearing and stuff, but there's a ceiling to what I can do. And I think she plays that so well.
Yes, I think there's a feeling she gives of someone where this is not necessarily her life goal to be an actress, but like it pays well enough and she grew up in this world, so you know, she's getting by. And I love when she makes those little quips either to herself or to other people to like, you know, either like pass the time or to just cope with a difficult situation, sort of like how Carrie Fisher was, I think. And those could have come across as very forced and not all that natural coming from an actress like Meryl Streep, but she's got the rhythm down pat. I think like the expressions she has, she's kind of amused by herself sometimes, but it's not, again, like she's overly obnoxious about it either. It's just like, this is kind of an extension of my personality to just make these little observations. Meryl actually has a quote that I found that's really insightful, I think, where she talks about reading Postcards from the Edge, the book, and how she really responded to that element of Suzanne. She said, "When I read the book, I thought, here's somebody who had endless resources to survive. She is relentless about her demons, but is equally relentless about her humor. She serves her jokes like dessert for her own amusement, and it makes everybody else feel good too."
Mm. Very Carrie Fisher, which is interesting because they
Yeah.
are best friends. They were best friends, Meryl and
Mm-hmm.
Carrie. But you don't get that Meryl is playing Carrie Fisher. You know, she's not doing a Carrie Fisher
Not an
impersonation,
impression.
but
Right.
like she's
Right.
taking that quote and doing it the Meryl way, not
Right.
a impersonation of how Carrie was, like as if I knew her.
Right. Right. I just think that's a really great read of Suzanne as a character, that she makes these little observations and quips, not just to make people laugh, but to like entertain herself and
Mm-hmm.
to sort of get by in this horrible world, essentially. So yeah, I think it's honestly a very underrated performance in her filmography, for as much as like a performance can be underrated but also nominated for an Oscar. But in her case, like, in the case of Meryl Streep, you can definitely argue that.
Yeah, I think it is top tier of Meryl nominations, but
Mm,
bottom tier and like remembered Meryl nominations. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
um,
exactly.
and I think this whole movie should be remembered more. It got a little bit of a reprisal, obviously, when Debbie Reynolds and Carrie Fisher passed away, and then again when Mike Nichols
Mm,
passed away, and the autobiography and things like that. But Meryl Streep is so good reacting to her mom in this movie, to Shirley
mm,
MacLaine. It is both so universal in that like way that maybe many of us react to our moms in a moment. You know, my mom is no Doris. Um, I'm the only star in my family.
oh
But
boy.
she, you know, the way that your mom exasperates you, and you can only be exasperated by your mom in that specific way because you're her child.
Exactly.
She reacts to that so well, but then also reacts to the specific circumstances she's dealing with her specific mom.
Hmm.
Meryl does, for me, some of her best acting ever in watching Shirley MacLaine. Like there are two big set pieces in this movie, right? The big staircase scene where they have that fight, and the party where Suzanne sings a lovely little lilting "You Don't Know Me" by Ray Charles cover, and then the crowd, it's a gay from the crowd screams, "Now you sing something, Doris," and she goes, I can't," and then I'm still
Don't make me sing.
yeah, I'm still here in B flat. And
Right.
the way Meryl reacts to her mom doing that, which has probably happened 100 times in her life, is I think some of the best acting that Meryl does. She seems genuinely excited. She seems genuinely in love with her mom in that moment. But then in the course of that song, when Shirley MacLaine says, "I got through all of last year and I'm still here," and she sort of she sings that directly to Suzanne. And what happens on Meryl's face is so, oh, my mom loves me. I almost didn't get through last year. I am still here. It's all of the things. And it's so wonderful. It's such lovely acting.
Yeah.
It's it is among my favorite movie scenes. I watch that like YouTube clip of Shirley MacLaine singing that. It's like almost like a New Year's tradition, like a New Year's Eve
Mm.
tradition towards the end of the year. I'm like, let me pop this on and remember, we all got through we got through all of last year and we're still here. It's so
Yeah.
wonderful.
That is such a beautiful little moment of movie magic, I
Yeah.
think. But even before that, I think like when she is going home and realizes that her mother has thrown a surprise welcome party for her, it's like, well, here we go again. But then it's like when she is there, I feel like there's a part of her that does enjoy at least some of the predictability of that. It's like her mother won't change. And even though there is a rebellious quality to Suzanne, I think she also has a deep down appreciation that there is that little bit of stability there in her very chaotic life. And even when she herself is singing in that moment, that weathered quality in her voice, I think has a lot of character. She's not perfect as a vocalist, but she is very spirited.
The start of Meryl Singer that we all got so sick of. I mean, yes, she sang a little bit in
Yeah.
Silkwood, but if you had told me when I was watching her sing "You Don't Know Me" in a denim jacket that 20 years from now she'd be the witch in Into the Woods, I would have said, get the hell out of here. That shouldn't happen. And it did happen.
And yet.
And that's fine.
But got another nomination for it. Yep.
So it is interesting. All of these things that we've come to know Meryl for now, the Meryl movie star, I guess I'll say, that she has been for the last 15, 20 years. There's a lot of those kernels here. It's the comedy, it's the singing,
Yeah.
And then it sort of goes away after Death Becomes Her and restarts with The Devil Wears Prada. And then, we're like, Meryl, we love you, but maybe you don't have to sing in this one, maybe like, it's okay. Let Donna Murphy do your vocals for you in this one. Shady on the podcast.
I like to think that her vocals in this is like a precursor to Ricky and the Flash. Yes. Personally, it's got that grit to it.
That's like that's like a sideways sequel. That's what happened to.
Yes,
do that.
I think so.
Please,
that's canon.
I would love that. Now we have said it here, right now. That is canon.
Yep. But yes, to go back to what you're saying, that scene of her just reacting to her mom, I think is so incredible. And it is like a little bit like she kind of regresses into being that little kid again, just admiring her mother, which I think is a very real thing that a lot of people experience when they're around, their mother or their parents again after some time away. It's just like you're just kind of back in that mode again. I think that's just really well done.
I think it also has to convey a lot of it has to do with Shirley's performance. She has to perform that as Shirley MacLaine, as Debbie Reynolds. Like, she has to be such an undeniable veteran star. But we're not seeing anyone else's reactions. So, like, she is also the avatar for, we get how people react to Doris. Because despite Suzanne's resistance, she also can't help but react like that to her mother.
Yes, exactly.
So good.
And there's also this relationship, of course, with the Dennis Quaid character of Jack, this film producer who was the one who drove her to the hospital after the overdose, and then he comes around again. I do love the tone that Meryl takes with the scene of him kind of like confessing his love for her, and she has all these sort of like neurotic expressions when she's nervous because it's like, he's hot. He's Dennis Quaid in 1990. Like, we understand. He seems like he's passionate and caring and all this stuff. But she also thinks deep down that, like, after all this, she's being reminded that, maybe she's bad news, that it's not worth the risk of her getting hurt, and she makes, again, more of those little quips because that's just in her nature, saying, like, he sounds like a rug salesman, things like that.
One of the best declarations of love that is met with an eye roll ever.
Yes.
I love it. And it doesn't, it's not a long walk from, it's actually the first time I'm thinking of this, from the Han Solo, Carrie Fisher, I love you, I know moment to her reaction. Suzanne's reaction is like, okay, all right, okay. I mean, what am I supposed to do with this? It's so good.
Yeah, she also has another one of those, like with CCH Pounder earlier in the film, saying like, do you always talk in bumper stickers? Like those little lines like that.
The writing on this is like, it's so sharp. You'd cut yourself on it. It's so good. When she breaks up with Dennis Quaid because she finds out that he's been having sex with Annette Bening.
Annette Bening, here she is again.
Right.
What a year.
And he says, I don't particularly like this side of you. And she says, I'm not a box. I don't have sides. This is me. One size fits all. Perfect. I mean, side tangent is that like Annette Bening is having an Anjelica Huston year. Like that, which is the Grifters. And I think that this performance, her one scene performance in this movie does, she's doing it for the endorphins. Moment with Meryl, that one scene sort of wonder, I think, helps make that Grifters nomination sort of undeniable.
God, What a year of Annette.
What a year.
Yes.
I mean,
We've been getting a lot of Annette content recently
and
between this and Naiad is happening now as we speak. So
the way I feel about Annette Bening is sort of the way I feel about Glenn Close is like, do not nominate them if they are not going to win. Like
that is kind of where I'm at too, believe it or not. Some people may be surprised to learn that, where it's just like, do we need to nominate her for Hillbilly Elegy? Why are we doing this?
well, I think she was dangerously close to winning for Hillbilly Elegy, I think, which,
yeah, it just in retrospect, it's just
tough.
History's not going to look kind on any of that. But anyway,
I think it's similar to, again, you'll talk about this in a few years, the way like Annette almost won for being Julia. Like, is that really what we want? Is that really, I mean, yes, we would love for her to, slay the beast, slay the dragon that is Hilary Swank. But being Julia,
ultimate rival.
Evelyn Vow, novel adaptation that doesn't exist. Sure. Anyway, I digress. I think the other big scene in this movie that is like endlessly on a loop. If you want to get like an easy 1,000 likes on Twitter, post this scene, is the staircase fight. It's truly a perfectly constructed, literally Shirley MacLaine is up on her high horse. They're fighting. Things come out in the fight that seem natural and seem like long simmering resentments, and so funny. Such a great button on that scene. Really wonderful.
Yeah, and obviously Shirley really owns that scene, especially with that twirled up line. The guttural quality of that is second to none. But I think Meryl holds her own too.
Because I think Meryl sort of like, it starts with Meryl in that she's like just taking some pills, is like, not so lucid on the floor of the stairs. She's crying. She's very soft. It starts very soft in Meryl's, in Meryl's camp. You want me to do well, just not better than you, which is something that you feel like she's been wanting to say to her mom for 30 years. And then you see their dynamic in that, well, Doris is going to take this and blow it up, and then Susan has to like rise to her level, and she can't, like she screams at her, right. What about my 18th birthday party when you lifted your skirt up in front of everybody? She's screaming full-throated, and then Shirley just, Doris annihilates her.
I love it. It does feel like there is a bit of truth, perhaps. I don't know if that's exactly the Debbie Carey dynamic necessarily, but I feel like it is something that like you wouldn't get a little detail like that of being like, you never wanted me to outshine you, in the case of someone who is like outside of the business, who didn't have that kind of relationship with a famous mother. Like there's something about that line that always just cuts deep. I think
it's not exactly that, it's something close enough to that, right? Like
yes, exactly.
It's something in that neighborhood.
Yeah. So overall, I think this is a really, really great nomination for her, and she ends on a high note, quite literally, because she has her "I'm checking out" song at the end. Yeah. Which I think is another really striking vocal from Meryl, and an earned sort of catharsis, I think, at the end of everything.
Disappointing, though, that she didn't sing it at the Oscars. Reba McEntire performed it. Which I wonder.
Meryl was pregnant at the time.
Oh, was she pregnant?
I don't know if that is why, but that is one of the reasons why she isn't there, because this is the only time she didn't attend the Oscars for her nominations. Fun fact.
Oh, right. What I like about Meryl Streep, the fun fact that I love about Meryl Streep, is that she's obviously been nominated more times than anyone, or just any other actor. Either way.
Any other actor. 20-something. Yeah, because John Williams has like 50.
Oh, right. And I don't think we talk enough about the fact that that means she's lost more than anybody else. She has sat in that stadium, in that ballroom 19 times and lost. That is double the number of times the next most losing actress has. I mean, granted, she's got the 3 at home, but I don't know, if you're Meryl Streep and you're getting dressed up to go to the Oscars for Into the Woods, are you going, well, I mean,
for Florence Foster Jenkins,
or for Florence Foster Jenkins, are you going, or Music of the Heart, are you going, I'm gonna definitely win this Oscar? You're just like, All
She's
right, I
just
got
here for a good time and a free
yeah.
concert, you know. It's
Let me get dressed. Let me grab
yeah,
Don.
mingle.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. All right, anything else on Meryl before we move on to our final losing nominee?
No, I just think her 90s were, I think, interesting. I think I prefer her 90s Oscar nominations to her 80s Oscar nominations.
Yeah,
Just a little bit more
I would
interesting.
say more rewatchable as
Yeah.
well.
And like
Because some of those were a slog
if
in
she's
the
gonna
80s.
do like weepy over the top, I'm glad that it's one true thing because I think
Yeah.
it is the top of that form. Even if it's a
Hmm.
little melodramatic at times, I think it's
Yeah, you
the
could say
best of that version, the best version of that kind of
that.
sick mom movie.
All right. Let's move on to Miss Joanne Woodward in Mr. and Mrs. Bridge. So, this is our fourth and final nomination for Joanne Woodward. She is still alive, but she is retired now. First nominated and won for The Three Faces of Eve back in '57. And she got these intermittent nominations over the course of 30 years or so after that. So Rachel in '68, Summer Wishes, Winter Dreams, one of my favorite titles ever, in '73. And so Mr. and Mrs. Bridge is her first nomination in 17 years. So in between, she did a lot of TV work. She became the queen of TV movies, basically, and racked up a bunch of Emmy nominations and a few wins. And she didn't do a whole lot of feature film work during that time. She only had 4 films between Summer Wishes, Winter Dreams, and Mr. and Mrs. Bridge. Another thing worth noting, of course, is that this is Joanne working with her husband, Paul Newman, playing the title characters. And so Joanne was a fan of the original novel that this is based on, and she and Paul met with James Ivory of Merchant Ivory, who were, just getting big in the late 80s to adapt this. So the film is a very understated drama about an older couple, Walter and India Bridge, played by Paul and Joanne, who are living in the 30s and 40s in Missouri. Walter is a conservative lawyer who has trouble expressing his feelings, and India is this sheltered sort of housewife who has trouble adjusting to changing times, and it just is sort of following their lives through to the mid-century without too much overt plot that you could really say. It's very much a observational sort of character study. So yeah, let's talk Joanne Woodward. Thoughts on our real legend of the group here and her final nomination.
This is the only movie from this lineup that I had not seen.
Uh-huh.
What a lovely little movie and just a gorgeous performance. I mean, she's Joanne Woodward. So it's not surprising, but you can sort of see why she was singled out of this movie.
Yeah.
And how particularly in her partnership with Paul Newman and how fun she is and playful she is in this movie. You can feel the energy of them being this long-standing couple, both in and out of Hollywood, and seeing them teamed up again together. It really comes through in the performance and in her interactions with him. I really think that she just put me at such ease when I was watching her. And from the few Joanne Woodward movies I've seen before, it's that's what I love about her on screen, is that she just has such an easy command of the screen and of the camera and of the character. And I think she's great. I think she's Joanne Woodward, right? What is there, what is there to say that I can't say? And I do feel bad because this movie is obviously up against a film that was formative to me that I watched when I was way too young, and 3 of my favorite movies of all time. And I do think it's a testament to this performance that I liked it so much, stacked up against these performances that I've seen over and over and over again.
Yes. I mean, this is definitely the one of this group that has not necessarily had a cultural tale after this necessarily, but I mean, I mentioned this, I think, on the Summer Wishes Winter Dreams episode. It's been kind of nice to see Joanne through the years as the young budding artist with Three Faces of Eve, her Oscar win there, and going through to this young woman self-actualizing in Rachel, then as this mother in Summer Wishes Winter Dreams, and now as this older woman. It's just I'm seeing her at least at these very concrete stages of her life, And she was able to just maintain that same level of quality. And I would say even got better with age. I think she's one of those actresses who gets a win on her first nomination, but then it's like only kind of gets better after that point and just further develops her craft. And this is a really affecting performance for me. This is a movie that's right up my alley, you know, tackling suburban life, generational divide, character driven. You know, I don't think it quite reaches like its full potential, especially with the very bizarre anticlimax at the end. I'm not sure what the choice was there, but I think both her and Paul are super well cast here in these roles, especially Joanne. She's always been so effective at playing these types of repressed housewife kind of roles. And I find what she does to be really kind of heartbreaking. You know, this is another episode, just like with On Golden Pond, where I'm going to bring up my grandparents. Not that they had like a super strained relationship like we see here necessarily, although I don't know, maybe behind closed doors, who knows? But maybe I was seeing them on their best days.
Do we ever really, if we never really know our parents, we really never know our grandparents.
That is true. But from my understanding, there is this feeling that Joanne evokes here that reminds me so much of my grandmother in terms of really just like, you know, valuing her family, being very traditional and old fashioned, but also just like very good natured and wanting to see the best in everybody. But like, you know, part of that also means sometimes sort of just being in her own little world. And I think Joanne really captures the nuances of that really well. Just like those warm kind of smiles, the affection and the trust that she has in other people, even when they don't reciprocate that, and those really crushing moments when that love is not returned to her. I think she just has so much love for her husband and her family, but like, at least for him, he cannot get to a place of expressing his feelings, and you just see her spirit kind of like crushing in these tiny little moments. And so it's a very subtle performance, and I credit the Academy for seeing her in what she does here.
Yeah, I think that she is so, what I think she's really good at is you get the sense that she's not kooky, but like she's got like, you know, a little, she's sort of funny, quirky, I think is a better way to describe it. And she, you know, she's painting and she wants to go in analysis, and she's, you know, Blythe Danner is having all these problems and like she's joking about it. And that's obviously her personality, because Blythe Danner is like, please don't joke right now. I'm very serious. This is very serious.
Yeah.
And she gives all of that without, there's no scene of her doing anything particularly quirky, but you can just see that layer underneath, that if she had a husband who didn't repress her, or if she was born in a different time, she would have been able to fully execute on the person that she wanted and could be. But just such a warm, she might be a little exasperating as a mom, but you know your mom loves you so much and like she just wants the best for you. You know why people would find that she's a good friend. You know, she just is so sweet natured in a way that doesn't, but I think in roles like this, it's not like you don't watch her and go, wake up already, you know, where I think that in roles like this that we've seen before can be like that.
Yeah.
And I think that her sweet nature also helps balance out Paul Newman's performance, who I think seems like a good guy. He's just like a man of that era who like is not, and he says this as much, like, I'm not good at this, you know, sort of thing. But in a, you know, in those moments, like when he's driving their housekeeper and he's like being rough with her after her husband is, you know, is arrested for drugs, he's going to help her, but he's not going to do it in a soft way, which I think makes him, again, like, he's not a bad guy. He's just like not going to coddle you or express his emotions, but will try to do the right thing as he sees it.
Mm-hmm.
What I think is so great about casting the two of them together is that you do get the feeling that when they're talking about the way it used to be, and she's like saying, you used to write me poems, and you know, when he's sort of quietly admitting, I think to his daughter, right, that like, I still have a great deal of want for your mother, which is such a
Mm-hmm.
big, you feel like such a big thing for him to say, especially to one of his children. I think you feel all of that. And I was watching the movie and wondering, am I feeling all of that because I know it's Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward, one of the greatest love stories of all time? Or am I feeling that because of what these performances are? And I think it's one of those cases where that art and life blurring is good and it helps the movie.
Yeah, I think most people watching this in 1990 probably are bringing that little bit of baggage to it. Yeah, I think she gets that really great, I think, early in the movie breakdown scene after she like reads a horoscope where she's confronting him about not appreciating her enough and feeling like everyone else in their life seems to mean more to him, even their maid and her barbecue ribs. Like that's a funny little line. But also she's so earnest in what she's saying that you can't help but feel for her. And I do think she is obviously able to access those emotions because it's Paul that she's talking to. So it just feels totally lived in and like a conversation that they could have had, perhaps. So there are, I think, some very real emotions in scenes like that. But it's like, it's like half the work is already done. They just have that easy rapport.
Yeah, she is wanting more from him emotionally and isn't getting that. And he seems to still be very into her physically. He has
Yeah,
they have that other scene where he's trying to be like, hey, and she's like, it's late, get away from me. Um,
right.
and I do think that you do also get the feeling that she is playing really well on I can't connect with you like that because we're not connected in any other way right now. The scene,
Hmm.
towards the end of the movie where are they? Are they at like the bank um safety deposit box where she's asking him,
Mm.
"Do you love me anymore?" And what I think is good about what I think the movie is showing, and again, maybe this is projecting the Paul and Joanne of it all. I don't get the sense that he doesn't love her, that he
Right.
can't say it, he can't verbalize it, he can't express it, but that she's feeling that is so heartbreaking that she
Hmm.
has to ask that when, as an outside viewer, as somebody viewing this marriage, you're feeling a little bit of, oh no, that's not what this is. That's not what this is. He just can't tell you. And it's heartbreaking.
Yeah, it is. And it's interesting because I think a lot of her performance is repetitive, which can sound like a negative, but I think in the case of this film is actually a positive because like in so many of her scenes it's her being kind of genial and happy, if not just like trying to keep her spirits high, and then in the process of that showing at times that she is a little bit out of touch with reality, that it's not the 20s anymore, that her kids don't need to be constantly mothered, and it's like it kind of serves the story that's being told, I think, that she doesn't really know any better or any different, or she hasn't afforded the opportunity, I guess, to grow as a person. So she does have kind of the same types of conversations with her family, like when she is once again asking him at the bank to appreciate her more and to tell her that he loves her, or she has like multiple conversations with her friends, like with the Blythe Danner character, about how lucky they are, and like that scene where Blythe Danner's character is clearly having this bad episode mentally and feels on the verge of a full-on breakdown. She just becomes like kind of uncomfortable, and she's still sympathetic, but rather than fully knowing exactly what to say in that moment, she says something like, aren't we awfully lucky,
Yes.
and just
But
kind of
at first
tries
she
to
makes
change
a
the
joke,
subject.
right? She like makes a joke and Blythe Danner says, like, please don't joke right now. Please don't be gay right now, I think is actually exactly what she says. And
Don't be gay right
yeah.
now.
And I'm like, if I had a nickel for every time I heard that.
I
But
should clip that
yeah.
out of context. Yeah.
But I mean, Blythe Danner saying that, it's,
Yeah.
a gorgeous moment. But that is, clearly how she handles things because she doesn't have
Right.
to handle or deal with real life emotion that often.
Hmm.
Blythe Danner's great in this movie, by the way.
Yeah. Would not have minded a supporting
Ugh,
nomination from her either.
me neither.
Lots of interesting actors here. Kira Sedgwick, Robert Sean Leonard, It's an interesting cast.
Kira Sedgwick, baby, like such a
Babyface, yeah.
baby. I mean, I love,
Maybe put her in Pretty Woman.
yeah, right. I mean,
See what happens.
I wouldn't be
I don't
surprised
know
if
how young she is,
I
but
wouldn't be surprised if she was in the mix. It's sort of like, I mean, they do play
yeah,
sisters later, and
yeah.
but probably in Kira Sedgwick's only brush with a nomination for something to talk
Mm.
about.
Yeah, another obviously heartbreaking scene, I think, is that Eagle Scout event moment, where they kind of tell all the scouts to kiss their mothers, and Robert Sean Leonard's character doesn't kiss her, and for her, it's like she wishes there was just no fuss, right? And she just doesn't understand maybe why he won't, but she still has love for him anyway.
Yeah,
Same with her other kids, same with Walter.
she's very put upon in a way by her kids, by her husband, right? But in a way that
Hmm.
isn't typical, in that she doesn't seem pathetic or like woe is
Right,
me about
exactly.
it. It's very, and it's also not very stiff upper lip. It's just sort of, well, this is how life is, and I'm going to choose to react to it in a sort of positive way. But some of this is something's, breaking in here, right? Like she's doing that
Mm,
really well too, of this. I'm sort of sensing that it doesn't have to be like this. Can we discuss that? Can we discuss that you guys don't
right.
have to treat me like this and I could have more? And she's not
Mm.
quite there, but she's thinking about it. She's realizing that it's a possibility.
Yeah, yeah. I think there is a kind of blissful ignorance that she kind of lives in and sort of is making peace maybe with that existence, even while knowing there is more out there that she could adapt to those changing times and really understand what's happening on a deeper level. But it's like either she chooses the path of least resistance or she just isn't afforded the opportunity to do more with it. So it's actually very affecting work and very naturalistic. The moment towards the end when the Blythe Danner's character has taken too many sleeping pills and passes away, that's another really affecting moment. Just her sort of outpouring of grief and compassion, especially after Walter is making these horrible comments about her saying like she was basically like a burden, you know, to her husband, and her frustration in being like she was my best friend. I think that just really, it cuts right through you.
Yeah. And she's saying it also, he's saying it and she's saying it like that concept doesn't even factor into his, you don't get the sense that
Yeah.
he has a best friend, and that
No.
he can't really relate to it.
Yeah, so it's a very delicate performance. I think the ending is, would love to know your take on the ending and the choice to sort of end it on her trying to exit the garage, and she gets stuck right at the point of like where she can't get out and she can't get out of the window, and then it becomes like this ticking clock kind of moment when the rest of the film wasn't really like that. Just curious what you think.
I think tonally it was weird. And I think for a film that was like relatively subtle throughout the whole thing, it sort of was like
Yeah.
jarringly. She's trying to get out and she can't, and she is trapped.
And this is like a survival situation, right?
Yeah, I thought it was a weird choice. And I felt like, especially from, Merchant Ivory at this point, it was sort of like a real left turn, because I think that they are, churning out these Oscar period pieces during this
Hmm.
time frame. And they're, in this time frame at least, like they're all very relatively even keeled. They're very lovely. They're very dry, but they're high quality, and they're not trying to be, I don't want to say zany, because it's not zany, but it's just like in the neighborhood of zany for a movie like this, you know?
Yeah.
So it didn't land with me, especially coming off of kind of the emotional heft of Blythe Danner's passing. And,
Right.
it's and then I want to be, I sort of, it's one of those situations where I want to ask them, is what you're trying to do as obvious as what I think it is, or is there's like some other level of this that I'm not smart enough to understand, which is very possible. I'm very open to being dumb. But it didn't they didn't stick the landing on that for me.
Yeah. And we kind of just fade out on her being stuck in the car. And then we get title cards that are just like, by the way, she's fine.
Yeah.
And it's like, this is a weird sort of like satirical kind of tone that we're taking at the end with these like cards of being like, here's where everyone ended up after all this.
Yeah, I did say this at the beginning, or not, that's not true, not at the beginning, but I think in talking about Julia and like how these are so many comedic performances, I wouldn't have minded it, and maybe this says if it was a different team behind it, they were like inching up to satire, I feel like in a lot of cases.
Mm,
And
yeah.
I actually would have loved to have seen the version of the movie where that ending fit and like that little
Hmm.
bit more satire. Because, like I said, I think Joanne Woodward's performance is funny. I mean, Paul Newman's performance is funny too when he's out to dinner with his secretary and he keeps on going, check, please. We'll get the check as she's like clearly trying to like keep him out. And so I would have liked to have seen more of that because at the end of the movie it seems like no, this was a satire all along. She's stuck in she's stuck in the garage. I don't know. It's weird.
A weird note to
Yeah.
end on, but really just lovely work from Joanne Woodward, and I think a nice alternative to some of the more louder performances that we get in this category, which is not like a value judgment either way, but
And also
a
interesting
nice variety.
because the rest of these movies end so well. I mean, at the time,
Mhm.
the Pretty Woman ending was like, yeah, sure, fairy tale, whatever. But
Yeah.
the Grifters ends on that like big dramatic note that they nail. Postcards ends on that, beautiful, great, triumphant song
Hmm.
performance by Meryl. Interesting to note that this one kind of like just missed it there.
Shall we get to our winner?
Let's do it.
All right. Kathy Bates in Misery. So excited to talk about the great Kathy Bates, especially because this performance, again, winning an Oscar horror performance based on Stephen King, that doesn't happen. So very, very rare here. Kathy Bates, she was born in Memphis, Tennessee. She moved to New York, and she said that she had some trouble getting work because she wasn't considered a conventional beauty, but she did quite a bit of stage work. She got a Tony nomination for Night Mother, and she did some supporting work in films like Come Back to the Five and Dime, Jimmy Dean, Jimmy Dean, and Morning After, which we talked about. She had a brief scene in that. Not all that much of note, though, before Misery in film, although she was certainly well respected for her stage work. But when Misery happens, it's just like the Julia Roberts Pretty Woman situation where she has fully arrived and she's had a pretty great career ever since. She's gotten 3 more Oscar nominations, all in supporting. So we won't be talking about them as part of this series. But, this is her big leading moment at the Oscars, and it's certainly a historic one. So Misery, she wasn't necessarily a name that the producers wanted. Apparently, Anjelica Huston and Bette Midler were sought for it, but they both turned it down. Bette said later that she regretted that decision, but the screenwriter William Goldman really advocated for Kathy Bates. I think he also said something to the effect of like him writing the adaptation with her in mind. So yeah, let's break it down. Misery, it's about this successful author, Paul Sheldon, who wrote a series of romantic novels centering on the character of Misery Chastain. And one day, after finishing his latest novel in his cabin in Colorado, he crashes his car because of a blizzard, and he's rescued by a nurse, Annie Wilkes, played by Kathy, who brings him to her home and tends to him as he's bedridden from leg injuries. And while she seems helpful at first, she reveals that she's his #1 fan who's read all his novels and loves Misery to the point of full-on obsession, and he quickly becomes alarmed by her erratic behavior and her very intense parasocial relationship that she has with him, which leads her to take some drastic actions to have him stay with her. So let's talk the great Kathy Bates and Misery. Eddie, thoughts on this enduring performance and Kathy Bates overall?
Kathy Bates overall, legend, classic. We love her. Even though I will say that earlier in this podcast, I did say that one of my biggest heartbreaks was J-Lo not getting nominated for Hustlers. And there is blame to be put on, not Kathy Bates, but,
Mm.
but I digress.
Yes,
Um,
I get it.
yeah. But what a career, what a legend, what a actor who like knows exactly who she is and how to utilize her presence, her physicality, her her tone, her delivery. I just think all of her roles, she's so like self-possessed. And I think that probably comes from her being such a big stage actor. She knows how to do everything she can do so well. Again, Misery is one of my favorite movies. One of my favorite books. It is a movie that, this might be too much for your listeners to know about me, but it is a movie I like to watch when I'm sick, because I always think things could be worse,
There you go.
It's also like, I know that some people do this, say Star Wars, but when I was dating my now fiance, early days, it was the movie that I showed him and like watched him watch it and be like, if you don't like this movie, I don't know what we're gonna do here. Fortunately, he did, and we're gonna get married. So
Wow.
and it was tight there. It was close.
Could have gone either way.
Yeah. She's so good in this movie because I do think she has the highest degree of difficulty.
Yeah.
One step in a different direction and this completely goes off the rails, right? It's too campy, it's not scary, it's too scary. This is, I think, really an underrated movie holistically. This movie released today is 8 Oscars. It's James Caan is on his way. William Goldman gets nominated. That production design gets nominated. It's would be received in a totally different way now, but none of that happens if Kathy Bates is not perfect. I think she's so terrifying. She's so funny like so darkly funny. They did soften her from the book to the movie. In the book, she's, I love Stephen King. He's not always the most nuanced writer. She's very just like nuts in the book, and she's much more violent. And so even how she balances kind of the, you sympathize with her. You don't want her to win. You do want her to get her comeuppance at the end, which is unfortunately needs to be death. Like you want her to die. In that way, and a lot of that has to do with James Caan's performance as well. But that scene where she's sort of staring at the window and says, "You'll never know what it's like to be someone like me, losing someone like you." I butchered that quote, but you do feel for her in that moment because she is, maybe this is again the 2024 lens looking back on it, but she's a very mentally ill woman. She's she's not just pure evil, and I think there's enough nuance in it from considering 1990. And she plays it like that it's an all-time win for me.
Yeah, I totally co-sign that. I adore Kathy Bates. I find her to just be so down to earth and real, and such a gifted comedic actress. I think her ability to sort of enliven a film is incredible, which is why she's such a great supporting actress. But as you could see with Misery, like, she's more than capable of being a compelling lead. And this performance is one that I have never gotten out of my mind fully since whenever I first saw it. I think the imagery of this film, those big close-ups of her face, her sledgehammer, the way that this all sort of comments on stan culture all these years later, it's one of those performances in this category that's really lived on and taken on a life of its own almost. So when I did first sit down to watch this again, I was like, okay, let's see if this still kind of holds up in the way that everyone likes to praise her as. And I feel like, honestly, she like grew in my estimation. Granted, it had been a while since I'd first seen Misery, but I was just watching this again and thinking of how difficult this performance was to pull off, like you said, and deliver the right kind of energy, to have that psychological sort of instability and play into the dark comedy, but not have it be too silly or too two-dimensional. What she does is make this character genuinely scary, but also understandable in a way that she is fully justified in her mind as to what she's doing. And you can definitely feel that undercurrent of loneliness. It's such a wild sort of balancing act that she pulls off, that is like horror and comedy and then some pathos when you're not expecting it. that I think, despite being in what like a snobby person might dismiss as just a genre kind of performance, it definitely is the most difficult one to pull off from this lineup and to not fully embarrass herself.
For sure. I mean, it's her career, right? You know, if she whiffs this,
Yeah, it's
there's
over.
no, it's over.
Yeah.
Because if she doesn't nail it, like I said, it doesn't go from a 10 to an 8. It goes from a 10 to a 4. It goes from a 10 to a 2.
Yeah.
And she just has to do everything perfectly. You know, she has to walking around him menacingly, pouring gasoline on him almost absent-mindedly, in such a way that is, again, a little bit funny, very terrifying, and fully believable. I also think it's very interesting about this movie that, again, it was also a confluence of all of these different things. This wouldn't be happening if the Annie Wilkes from the book was written for the movie. You know, that Annie Wilkes in the book, you know, runs over a deputy with a riding lawnmower, you know, chops off Paul Sheldon's legs instead of hobbling him. Like, all of these things had to come into existence in the right way for her to take that role and do all of these things with it. And she just, I feel like, similarly to Julie Roberts, but in a totally different way, that feeling of, I have my moment and I'm going to take it, is so satisfying to watch as a viewer, as somebody who loves actresses, who's somebody who loves movies, is, you know, she knew what she had and she knew what she had to do, and she did it. The rent was due. She was down and out and she did it. I also love that you said that this was a movie about toxic stan culture, and I just thought this is like a remake of Misery. Today would be like Club Chalamet,
Oh no.
Twitter account. The
Oh
real
boy.
story behind the Club Chalamet Twitter account.
Truth is stranger than fiction. Yes.
And poor Timmy.
Wow.
There's like, I also think it's worth noting that 1990 was such a big movie year and like such a big box office movie year. You know, it wasn't, 89 had Batman and like Last Crusade, but this had 4 of those, you know? And what I think is interesting is that timeless, forever montages at the Oscars, montages at AFI will be, you know, Kevin McAllister slapping his cheeks and screaming, the for good or for bad, the pottery scene in Ghost, Julie Roberts putting her hand in the, you know, in the jewelry box and having it snatched on her. Like, those are classic all-time movie scenes. And those are 150, $200 million movies. And the fourth of that is Kathy Bates, a sledgehammer on, you know, Sonny Corleone's ankles. Like, that
Yeah.
is a all-time classic, not just horror movie moment that transcended everything. Again, something if you were 9, 10 years old, you were talking about, you know, your older sibling came home from seeing this movie and told you about this moment as like the scariest thing you've ever seen. And I don't think that happens if just somebody is putting a sledgehammer to somebody's legs. It's because of how she portrays the fact, I have to do this. I don't want to do this, but I have to do this,
Just,
you know?
Yeah.
And you're kind of like, she's so good that you're sort of watching going, I mean, I guess she does. She's right.
Girl, I get it, you know?
Yeah. You know, if I could hobble every man who wanted to get out of my bed, you
Oh
know?
boy. Yeah, I mean, I also think she's just so good in those, even when she's not scary, quote unquote, just that like Midwestern pleasantness and just those little quirks and quips and like her kind of childish avoidance of swear words and the way she calls him a dirty birdie and all this stuff, is, it says a lot about her, and she plays it in a way that it makes sense. Like, you can imagine a different kind of actress taking this on and that kind of feeling, I don't know, a little bit condescending of just like, this is how like a country, someone who's from a small town would talk, but she just kind of inhabits that so easily.
She does really well Midwestern mean, you know, sort of that like
Yes.
Midwestern, I'm
Bless your
smiling.
heart. Yeah.
Yeah, she does that really well. And what other performance an actor is selling he didn't get out of the cocky duty car. You know, that like her not cursing is so close to being comedy in the wrong way.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's so close to being embarrassing, I guess. But that I think is actually why she's so good because it's so menacing that she's won't swear
Mm-hmm.
and that she is making you not like laugh at her, but sort of like nervously laugh, I guess. It's kind of like, oh, this is weird. And it's held up. It is held up for 34 years of you watching Kathy Bates not swear and say all of these things. And you're still like 30 something years later, oh, this is character work. This
Mm-hmm.
isn't shock value.
Totally.
This isn't, a trick. This is character work.
Right. Yeah. So I think that foundation is what makes it what it is. And of course the escalation of that could have been very silly, like we've been saying. It definitely that moment where she kind of starts reading the new manuscript and sees that it's nothing like the Misery novels that she loved, that it has profanity and everything. Like it escalates very quickly, and it feels like she enters this fugue state. But I think there's a way that another actress could have played that and made it two-dimensional, but there is just this understanding she has of Annie deep down, this woman who has traditional values, simple, working class, and she also has like these deep psychological issues and this parasocial relationship. And I do feel like she just understands that emotional connection that a person can have to an artist or an author before the idea of that discourse wise was even popularized, before we had a name for it other than like stalker, I guess.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's ahead of its
That
time.
for sure. It's a little bit taking, what became very popular with say Fatal Attraction,
Yeah.
that kind of from hell aspect and elevating it. And kind of like this, this became like if Fatal Attraction was the one night stand from hell or the mistress from hell, this was the fan from hell. Um, and it did sort of crystallize, it did sort of satirize kind of like our relationships to celebrities and did a good job without it being very heavy-handed of like making fun of that and making us see that as somebody who just spent 30 minutes like nearly crying talking about Julia Roberts, kind of that like what is fandom, what does it mean, how does it go too far. Like I said, this is a black comedy,
Yeah.
you know it's a
Mm-hmm.
horror movie, but it's a black comedy. You said when he starts rewriting the manuscript to the new Misery novel and she comes in first as like a book editor, and it's like, oh no, Paul, this simply won't do. In the previous book, this and this happened, you're just gonna have to rewrite it. And she's so even keeled and so matter of fact about it and so like, silly goose, no, you
Yeah.
got this wrong. I have some notes, here you go.
Right.
um, and then she comes in the next time and beats him. So it's just so well done. And she's so good. And I think none of this works if James Caan, who I think is very underrated in them, not that this is a new idea or new thought,
Mm-hmm.
but like certainly underrated in that movie because she has to be able to play off him and it has to work well. It has to work again perfectly.
Totally. And I think a lot of actors passed on that role because they thought it was like too recessive and all these things and they would be
Yes.
overshadowed. But yeah, I think it's such a great combination, the two of them.
Yeah, speaking of Annette Bening, I think Warren Beatty was like the most attached to it. It is one of those movies that every male in Hollywood
Yeah.
was attached to. And
Mm-hmm.
Warren Beatty was definitely like, let's rewrite it so at the end he has like a Rambo moment. Like that's how off Warren Beatty was on what like needed to happen. And James Caan, again, also down and out,
Yeah.
needed something, needed to nail it. And he was like, I'll slay in bed. Sure, yes.
Right?
Yes.
Seems
He knew
easy.
what he had.
Yeah. That whole sequence where like she's brought this typewriter for him, then in the new paper to write on top of the line, And then, of course, him seeing the bobby pin on the ground, which is like this lifeline for him finally getting out of this room. But she has to be away, so he sends her away. I love her creeping anger in that moment. Her just exploding at him to just show some appreciation after everything she's done. And just like that mocking tone she takes on is so funny, but also terrifying, especially with how Rob Reiner gives us these extreme close-ups on her face. Like the
Yeah.
angrier she gets, the bigger her face is across the screen. So I think in that way, the direction actually does aid in the effectiveness of the performance.
In that scene, I think also what she's so good at is, and I know I'm going to sound like a psychopath, but she gets so irrationally mad at him, and she knows that she's being irrational and she can't contain it, where everywhere else there's something so inciting her anger. He got
Yes.
out. She read the new book, she read the new manuscript. There it's sort of like this, he didn't do anything wrong, you did something wrong, and you made a mistake or whatever the case is, and she can't keep it in. And so
Yep.
there's something so ordinarily angry about her in that moment that explodes into that, makes it that much more terrifying, because she can't hold it in. And she kind of, you as the audience and her and him all know that, like, there's nothing that has happened in this scene to have warranted your reaction. Not that writing a manuscript warrants, having your legs broken, but in the context of her mind and in the context of the movie, it's kind of one of the only scenes that is something ordinary. He's just having a conversation with her. He's manipulating her, but he's having a conversation with her, and she doesn't like what he's saying. And
Right.
she knows that she should react like a normal person, but cannot.
Yeah, there are layers there. Yeah. And of course, the scene of her being very down and depressed and knowing that he's probably going to leave soon and that he'll never love her like she loves him. And it's like for a minute, you do feel that hint of the sympathy for this poor, sort of lonely woman, even after everything she's done. Or maybe not sympathy, but just like an understanding of why she is the way that she is. It's not that she's just a crazy person and that's just the end of it.
I think it's sympathy. I think a lesser film wouldn't want you to feel sympathy for her or wouldn't build you
Yeah.
towards that. But
Wouldn't have a scene like this at all. Yeah.
yeah, or even when they have like that dinner that he tries to
Mm,
stick her the drugs, and then she spills the wine, and she's there on a date and she is so excited and so happy,
yeah.
and you forget for a second that, like, what their situation actually is, and you go, oh, this poor lonely woman, this poor mentally unwell lonely woman.
Yeah.
And then you're, no, 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 of course not, she's trying to kill this guy. Like, so wonderful.
Right. But, right after that is like we get the reveal, of course, she has a gun and she might use it. And then he has this kind of brief moment where he's able to look into her big memory book. And we come to find out that she probably murdered her husband, that she was charged with murdering several infants when she was a nurse, and it goes far beyond her just being a deranged sort of fan. Like this is like a full-on menace to society.
Yeah, and I think that the movie is smart for maybe when it's garnering some quote unquote sympathy for her, then showing us like, no, 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 she killed babies, so she is bad. Like,
Right.
there is there's no gray here. You're
Mhm.
gonna want him to kill her at the end,
Yeah.
to kill her.
Right.
Not want is a strong word, but
Mhm.
like, they immediately sort of show you that she's not just obsessed with this guy. She's a does the worst things a person can do.
Right. Yes. And of course, the piece de resistance, of course, when she is confronting him about sneaking out of the room and that incredible needle drop of Moonlight Sonata, and her very methodically laying out this story of this tradition of hobbling. And again, like everything she's saying is like, this is inevitable. I have to do this. It is what it is. Like, what am I to do? So again, like the chilling part of it is just how patiently and calmly she goes about this.
But the button on that scene is, after she hobbles him, God, I love you. It's
Yes.
it's so good. And you just are in that moment. I mean, it's again, I think one of the most remembered, well-known, horror movie scenes. Horrific in the seeing of the leg and what you're not seeing. And then it ends with sort of like a button that is, I mean, that's comedy. That's dark,
Yeah,
dark,
totally.
dark comedy.
Yeah, I love this performance. I think it's so incredibly committed and vanity free, having those extreme close ups.
Yeah, her 1990 was also a real breakout year.
Hmm.
She's doing supporting work in Men Don't Leave, Dick Tracy, White Palace, Misery, and then it really is like off to the races for her. The next year, she's starring in Fried Green Tomatoes, which is
Yep.
a bona fide hit.
Hmm. And she's been killing it ever since. So I think after all this, we are, of course, running long as we always are. So now we should
Not
get.
with me. No, I'm very distinct.
But still an incredible, very fruitful discussion, I think. Let's get to the Oscars of it all. So before the Oscars, Kathy Bates and Julia Roberts won the Golden Globes for their respective categories. Kathy was nominated at BAFTA. I think Julia was nominated at BAFTA. Was Kathy? I don't remember, but
No, just Julia.
no, yeah. So I also made note that Julia did win the Kids' Choice Award.
And that
So
is a bellwether.
that's impact. Don't get to say that very much on the show. Kathy did win a few regional critics awards. Joanne Woodward won the New York Film Critics Award. She was nominated everywhere pretty much. Anjelica Huston, as you mentioned before, won a bunch of critics awards with LA National Society of Film Critics, but for both the Grifters and the Witches. Meryl, she got a Golden Globe nomination. She was there, happy to be there. But so
Meryl
everyone,
rolls out of bed and they give her a Golden Globe nomination,
am I right? Yeah. So everyone was definitely present as contenders in the lead up to these nominations. But I will say this was a wild race to read about in terms of coverage of who people thought might win. I will mention more on that a little bit later, but why do you think Kathy Bates was our winner from this group?
I think it was, again, like sort of an undeniable performance, and it was a hit at the end of the year. I think if this is a March release, like Pretty Woman,
Mm.
we're not, I think maybe she's not winning, but she is, I think, a perfect commercially successful, well received movie and an undeniable performance from probably somebody who had been around, like who had been, working on stage and kind of like working in supporting roles. It's a great work, like a working actor Oscar that usually happens. We usually see happen in the supporting categories,
Yeah.
but here bumped up to lead. And I don't think that I know we'll get into who the runner up is, but I don't think anybody else had enough juice in the right time
Mm.
to take it from her. I think she kind of took it at the end and kind of ran with it. And I think it's the kind of performance where you say a lot of times, if this person gets nominated, they will win. Because once they get nominated and the voters are watching it, it does feel like undeniable. But if not enough people watched it to nominate it, it's sort of the nomination signaled the win.
Yeah, I mean, you might suspect when you look back on this race that this was Kathy Bates versus Julia Roberts, and that was the race. But when I looked at articles from this time period, almost everyone said that this was a race between Anjelica Huston and Joanne Woodward.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a real feeling that, like, Anjelica was more popular than ever. She was in a film that the Academy clearly loved the most because it got in for director, screenplay, best supporting actress, too. So, and this was also, I think, a very dark, juicy role for her that was very well regarded, obviously. And then with Joanne, we were just coming off of Driving Miss Daisy, like Jessica Tandy's big win there. Plus, Geraldine Page had her overdue win in '85. This was definitely a friendly time for older veterans and sentimental films. And even though Joanne had already won before, it had been over 30 years since her win for Three Faces of Eve. So Kathy Bates was sort of talked about as like a dark horse. But at least by the press, was largely dismissed as like, this is a little too scary, a little too gory for the Academy to touch. But I think what the columnists, a lot of them missed about Kathy was that she had a very strong narrative too. Like she wasn't super well known, at least in the mainstream, before Misery, and this was her big breakthrough. She had so many big, showy, loud moments in this film. It is the performance of these that I think you just can't help but sort of react to. Like anyone sitting down in front of this film will have a reaction to her performance. It's so memorable. And you compare that to Mr. and Mrs. Bridge, which is, you know, yes, there was sentiment, but it was also thought to be like a stodgy drama. I think the Grifters, like that performance, perhaps some viewers could find it a bit cold and distancing. I don't know. Pretty Woman, I think, based on what else I read, she was kind of talked about as like a surprise nominee in the first place and not really taken seriously at all. And Meryl, it was just like, oh, she's Meryl, she's getting in, but she doesn't have a chance. So I do think in a very fractured race, I think Kathy Bates probably maybe won in a plurality, even if she had like the horror bias. That was really her only negative, you know.
I was surprised in looking back on it how much no one else really factored into this race. You know, everything is, all the wins and even the nominations at the Critics' Prizes are basically split up between Kathy Bates, Anjelica Huston, and Joanne Woodward. But even the runners up, it's just really around those three, and primarily Anjelica and Joanne. And so you don't have kind of like 6th, 7th, 8th place, you know, maybe Shirley MacLaine if she was, you know, considered for lead. So I think that that's also helped in that, because I do wonder if it's vote splitting that kind of got Kathy the win, or if there's so much more to respond to, because that whole voting season, people are kind of talking about the hobbling scene, you know, that's the scene that people are talking about. So it is, maybe Demi Moore is like in the mix a little bit for Ghost, but it's really just a 3-horse race. And for Meryl Streep's performance in Postcards from the Edge to be like so distantly 5th is crazy.
Yeah, but is a testament to the strength of everyone else too. Yeah, and obviously, you know, Kathy, looking at the speech, she was quite surprised. She had a fun little wink moment in her speech where she shouts out James Caan, saying she's his #1 fan. Very cute little moment there. Yeah, like we've been saying, I just think it's a great victory for horror films, genre films, and it's one that I wish could have been more of a trendsetter moving forward. It's bizarre to me that it feels like the Academy has become like more conservative about horror genre performances in the decades since.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it sort of like kicks off the start of the 90s as like, oh, Kathy Bates, oh, Silence of the Lambs, we're going to be doing like fun and interesting. No, then just
it ends there. Yeah. So shall we get to some Twitter questions?
Sure.
All right, let's start with David Pusak, who said, now that the 90s are here, how does it feel knowing that we're almost in the 21st century for Best Actress after being in the 20th for so long? Feels good. You know, I'm excited to get to a point where I actually, you know, really started to follow these Oscar races live, talk about some firsthand feelings that I had on certain races moving forward. So yeah, more of a question for me than for you, but how do you feel now that we're approaching the 21st century as a listener?
I think exactly that, you know, there are exactly that you're going to start talking about movies like this one that I'm like, oh no, I remember how, you know, this is my prime of like Oscar watching, and being able to remember what these articles said and like what the, you know, Siskel and Ebert that I would set my timer for to make sure I watched, you know, their night at the Oscars thing. So I think that is, I'm excited as somebody who listens.
And fun fact on that, they both endorsed Anjelica Huston on their If I Pick the Winners this year.
Yeah, I feel like she was the critical consensus.
Yeah, very much so. Chauncey Tellez said, how wide was the chasm between first and second place votes? I don't think it was a blowout necessarily. I think all of them probably had supporters. Maybe not Meryl as much, but I
I
don't
think
think
I
this
think
was
like
a
you said, I think it was a
yeah,
three-way
three horse.
race.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Jeffrey Kerr said Laurie Metcalf went on to play Annie Wilkes in a stage adaptation of Misery. Which of Kathy Bates' subsequent Oscar-nominated roles would you recast Metcalf with?
Oh, I saw this one and I actually got so excited about the idea of Laurie Metcalf being in primary colors.
That would be right up her alley. Yeah.
Perfect. Perfect.
I think About Schmidt of between that and Richard Jewell would also be really fun for her. She's
Evan, why are you bringing up Richard Jewell? I've already expressed how
I know
upset
well
that makes me.
that's part of the question.
I mean,
Um
Laurie Metcalf, I mean, you can sort of see her and Kathy Bates in like a similar, you could see them sort of
yeah,
interchanging those roles for sure.
I think so. Fritz said which other Best Actress winner should have a scene where she breaks her co-star's legs?
I mean, there's something about Richard Gere that makes me feel like I mean, there's something, he's a little slimy. But I mean probably Dennis Quaid, right? Meryl should hobble Dennis
I
Quaid.
think this is other Best Actress winners,
Oh,
not
sorry.
of this group. Yes.
Best actress winners. Who would I like to see do some hobbling?
I have
Um,
two, personally.
I mean, I think it's Nicole. I'd love
Nicole
to see
Kidman in The Hours.
Yeah, as Virginia Woolf. I'd love to see her
Wow.
hobble.
That would be an interesting twist. Yeah. Hobbling Leonard.
Yeah, he knows what he did.
He does. Yeah. I would say either Marie Dressler in Min and Bill. I mean, that seems right up her alley. Or Frances McDormand in Three Billboards.
Yeah, I guess if she found the guy, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's a good one.
If that movie had a proper ending. Anyway, moving on. Andy Bayless said, Kathy Bates for Misery is one of the coolest wins ever. Are there any other nominated or non-nominated roles in Stephen King adaptations that you would give a win or nomination to?
Well, I think to Kathy Bates for Dolores Claiborne, that's
Obvious
a huge
answer. Yeah.
right. I mean, that's the most obvious, biggest answer. I wish I had like something a little bit more in the vaults. I mean, Marcia Gay Harden in The Mist would be
Yes,
gorgeous,
I forgot
but
about
that
that.
is just
Yep.
that's a gay Twitter answer. That's not a real answer.
Well,
she's great. She is really genuinely great in that movie.
I mean, I would have loved just I don't know if I would nominate them, but like Jack or Shelley for The Shining would be fun nomination.
Yeah. Or I think Christopher Walken. No, is he in the Dead Zone? Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I got nervous that I was confusing that with Dead Ringers, but Christopher Walken in the Dead Zone is great.
Also, this is where I once again shout out Rebecca Ferguson in Dr. Sleep, who I think is incredible.
Oh, that's actually a great one. She is so good in that movie.
Right?
I love that one.
Andrew Carden said, would you have given Misery any other Oscar nominations?
Yeah, across the board.
You already mentioned it, kind of. Yeah.
I think I think the one that I'm most surprised by is I'm shocked it didn't get adapted screenplay. I think that is where it could have been in contention, because William Goldman is a well-loved screenwriter. It's such a good, tight script. I mean, they hate Rob Reiner, even though he had like the best director run of like a crazy director run. But I think that's the one. And of course, James Caan, I think. And low-key art direction, production design. I mean, that house and like it has to all be so perfect. The wallpaper, the tchotchkes, it's all so good.
Yes, I agree.
And picture.
All that. Yeah. Honestly, I don't know if this is controversial, but I just happen to love Richard Farnsworth and what he brings to it, so wouldn't have minded a supporting 100%. Nomination. Yeah.
I totally agree.
And Frances Sternhagen, too. It's really fun. Yeah.
In a different world, this could have been like a four nomination. In my world.
Yes. Another one from Andrew. I mean, again, we've answered this, but do you think Kathy deserved any additional lead actress noms in her career?
Dolores.
To which we say Dolores again. I haven't seen Fried Green Tomatoes in a hot minute, but I don't know. Could have been a cool Afterglow nomination. I don't really remember the performance as well.
The Fried Green Tomato one I want is obviously Jessica Tandy, so she could give back Michelle Pfeiffer her Oscar for Fabulous Baker Boys. But
there we go. You've come to the right place.
Thank you.
Jeremy Kaplan said, what Best Actress nominee from any year other than Kathy Bates would have her performance most enhanced if her dialogue had included the word cock-a-doodle?
I mean, obviously the obvious choice is Meryl and Sophie's choice, you know?
Yeah, I would love to know the context in which she says
You
cock-a-doodle.
would say, don't take my cock-a-doodle kid. I'm sorry.
Wow.
Sorry.
Too soon. It's been almost 50
Dark.
years, but still too
Really,
soon.
really dark.
I'm going to say Michelle Yeoh in Everything Everywhere All at Once.
Yeah, I mean,
Rakakuni,
like, are we sure that she
cock-a-doodle.
did it? Yeah, are we sure that she did it?
Yes. Also, I would love to just hear Judy Holliday in Born Yesterday say cock-a-doodle.
Yeah, or one of the Katharine Hepburns.
Oh boy, that would be
Yeah.
good too. Kenneth Israel said, Kathy Bates is one of the few actresses who managed to win despite being the sole nomination of their film. Jessica Lange, Charlize Theron, and Julianne Moore then all successfully followed in her footsteps. Which among those three actresses would nail the Annie Wilkes role the best?
It's funny. I think they all would be like add to it. I think Jessica Lange feels like the closest to it, but I think she'd be too Glass Menagerie coded. Like, I think
Yeah.
she would play it too obviously nuts.
I'm
So
going Julianne Moore here.
I'm gonna say Julianne Moore too.
Yeah. I think she could do the sweetness with the heightened
On that, like,
Magnolia,
yeah,
like don't call me lady kind of energy.
right.
Joey Gentili said, if Bette Midler had actually accepted the role of Annie Wilkes in Misery, does she win here?
No, sorry.
Hard no.
I love Bette Midler, but I just don't. I think all of those choices that we were saying, that tightrope that Kathy Bates walked, I think Bette goes too big in some
She
of those
is
moments.
just stomping on the tightrope.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think so. Ben Roberts said Anjelica Huston turned down Misery to make The Grifters. Would this role still have won if Huston had played Annie Wilkes?
I also don't think so.
Maybe a better chance than Bette, but I still don't think it would be the right fit.
I don't think it would have had the impact. I think some of the impact here is that Kathy Bates is sort of an unknown at this time.
Totally.
And that's what I think takes it to the win.
Ben Roberts, does Anjelica Huston give a better performance in The Grifters or The Witches? Was she nominated for the right film?
Yes, she was nominated for the right film. No, I think she's so good in The Grifters. I mean, I love The Witches, but she's so good in The Grifters.
Yeah, which is another one I haven't seen in probably since I was a kid, to be honest.
Yeah,
even then I don't. Yeah, so The Grifters is top of mind, so I'll just say The Grifters. Ben Roberts said, rank these performances of mothers with a questionable approach to parenting. Anjelica Huston in The Grifters, Mary Tyler Moore in Ordinary People, Anne Bancroft in The Graduate, and Joan Crawford in Mildred Pierce.
Well, I think the worst one is Anjelica Huston. She potentially had sex with and murdered her son. I think that's pretty bad.
Yeah, I don't know if this is like a moral ranking or like what performances do we like the most?
I was going morality, but okay, that makes actually much more sense what you're saying considering the topic of this show. Joan Crawford and Mildred Pierce is like such an all-timer performance for me, so I think I have to put that.
Objective number one.
Yeah, then Bancroft. Who was the other one?
Mary Tyler Moore.
Oh, those are good. I actually think in that lineup, somehow Anjelica Huston is fourth for me. I think Crawford, Bancroft, Mary Tyler Moore, Huston.
Yeah, I would go Crawford, Moore, Bancroft, Huston, which pains me to say because they're all fantastic.
Yeah.
But would not want any of them for mothers.
Not a bad
Perhaps.
mom in the bunch.
David Pusak, which of these women, this is a very specific question, which of the women who starred in a John Huston movie would best fit in Angelica's part? And here's a very long list of names, so strap in. Mary Astor, Bette Davis, Olivia de Havilland, Lauren Bacall, Claire Trevor, Jennifer Jones, Jean Hagen, Marilyn Monroe, Katharine Hepburn, Ava Gardner, Deborah Carr, Audrey Hepburn, Elizabeth Taylor, Gina Lollobrigida, Kathleen Turner, Susanna York, Lillian Gish, Julie Harris, Thelma Ritter, Bibi Anderson, Gladys George. Wow. So that's like all of old Hollywood, basically. Who would fit best in Angelica's part?
I want to say from old Hollywood, Bacall.
Yeah. I would say that
And
too.
and newer, I got to go with my girl Kathleen Turner, who is one of my favorite actresses ever.
And, Lauren Bacall kind of anointed Kathleen like
Yeah,
her successor.
yeah,
Yeah. And hey, Lauren Bacall, special appearance in Misery,
that all full circle.
right? Greg Creeman said, "Who would you be more afraid of pissing off, Annie Wilkes or Lily Dillon?"
Annie Wilkes. No, I mean she took a sledgehammer to this man's legs. She blew a hole through Richard Farnsworth. It's.
Yeah. I feel like I could reason more with Lily, and she doesn't seem like someone who would kill easily or even be
Yeah.
quick to anger.
Yeah,
So,
no, I totally agree. I think if you're nice to Lily, Lily's nice to you, unless you get in her way.
yeah, which I won't.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
there you go. Joey Gentili said, "It's on record that Pretty Woman actually started off as a dark thriller type script in the vein of Fatal Attraction. If it had gone that route, do you think the impact it had on pop culture would be as great, and would Robert still be here?"
Here among us, yes, I hope so. But no,
Nominated in this group.
no, I do not. I think that was the magic of it, the rom-com. I don't think if it was just
Yeah.
like a thriller, she's even launched.
I'm sure it would be like a talking point. Like, this is like the time for the erotic thriller type of movie. So, it would have been something, but I don't know. I definitely don't think she would have been a star as quickly as she did here.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Fritz said, "Cast Pretty Woman if it were made in the 40s or 50s."
Pretty Woman is not like that and different enough of a movie. Like there are movies in the 40s and 50s that are sort of Pretty Woman in
Yeah.
a way. Like so, it's my not being as immersed in old Hollywood. It's like, is it like a Hepburn and Tracy movie? You know what I mean? Like, is it that kind of situation?
Maybe. I went with like Natalie Wood and like William Holden type as Edward. I don't know, something like that.
I think Natalie Wood is really good.
Yeah. That's her Rebel Without a Cause era. I think she would have been a natural fit for something like that. The Ghost of Glenda Miss Jackson If You Nasty said, "Should Annette be here as well, along with Anjelica, or Shirley for Postcards with Meryl, or were they properly campaigned and supporting?"
No, I think that they're both supporting. I do
Yeah.
think that Postcards is a two-hander, but it is Suzanne. It's her story.
I think they both are, sizable roles, but neither of their stories, like you said, it's not their perspective. So,
Yeah.
Matt Stillman said, "Would Meryl have won if she had not previously won twice?"
I just don't think that this was it.
This wasn't the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This wasn't going to be her second Oscar.
And then if Roberts wins here, does she still win again for Aaron Brockovich?
I don't think she makes Erin Brockovich.
Sliding doors.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think if not much else changes, I could see it happening, but
I think considering how stacked that lineup is, I think it's Ellen Burstyn's. I think they in
Yeah.
2000, you flip a coin and it could be any one of them in 2000. And so the part of the reason that Julia was the narrative. They could anoint Laura Linney. They could finally give Joan Allen her an Oscar since she's been hanging around.
Yeah. Fritz said, "Rank Joanne's nominated performances." I don't know if you've seen all four of them.
I have not, so I'll abstain.
That's okay. My number one is Rachel Rachel. We love a woman self-actualizing. 2 is Summer Wishes, Winter Dreams. 3 is Mr. and Mrs. Bridge. And 4 is her win for The Three Faces of Eve. I just think she did better work later on. Three Faces of Eve is very like acting school 101, for better and for worse. Lila said, "This is sadly the last nomination for Joanne Woodward. Do you think she was ever snubbed for something in particular? Is there any recent nominated role in this category, regardless of age, that she would have been perfect for?" So I haven't seen a lot of Joanne's filmography, if I'm being honest, so it's hard to say like what else she should have been nominated for. I will just say that her last few film roles were pretty special, like Philadelphia. I think her narration in The Age of Innocence is really good.
I love her narration in The Age of Innocence.
Yeah.
I think that if she's not nominated for Mr. and Mrs. Bridge, she's nominated for Philadelphia.
I could see that. Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
good call.
That movie
Hmm.
did so well. I'm
Yeah.
surprised she didn't. It feels like Holly Hunter sort of snuck in and got that one.
Yeah. But for other nominated roles, like recent nominated roles, she would have been perfect for. Tough call. I think she's a different type than a lot of what's been nominated recently. So something like The Lost Daughter would be interesting for her.
Yeah.
I don't
I,
know.
this isn't that recent anymore, but you could see her in taking this performance to the next level in like a Far From Heaven.
Right. Okay. Yeah. No,
As
definitely.
Spider-Man and Far From Home.
You know
She would
what?
have
She
been
can do
great.
it all. Yep. Even something like this is going to sound totally out of left field, but like The Shape of Water in the Sally Hawkins role, in terms of like if she was much younger, of course, because she just has such an expressive face, but also like that recessive quality that that character has. I don't know. I think
Yeah,
she could have sold it.
like a Helena Bonham Carter in The
Hmm.
King's Speech.
Sure. John T said, "This is one of the only Oscar acting fields where all five contenders either had won or would win an Oscar eventually. How would you rank the five actresses based solely on their Oscar winning roles?"
So I have to put Joanne last because I haven't seen her. I haven't seen her
That's
Oscar
okay.
winning. And my favorite is performance, Oscar winning performance is Julia Roberts. So I have to
Yep.
put that first. I've painted myself into that corner. And then I think Angelica for Prizzy's honor. Meryl, I don't like her other Oscar wins, but Sophie's Choice is, pretty good acting. Um, yeah, and Kathy Bates About Schmidt is good, and she's great in About Schmidt. She's great in Primary Colors, but they don't hold as much. She gets dinged for Richard Jewell, I guess.
Yeah, I guess I sort of interpret it as like just rank the wins themselves based on reading this. I'm not sure if that's exactly what John meant, but I would say both of Meryl, like her first two, are top tier for me personally. Kramer versus Kramer and Sophie's Choice, and then
Mhm.
Julia and Aaron Brockovich, but that could very, very much go up or down depending on when I get to that rewatch. And then I would say Kathy in Misery, and then Joanne in Three Faces of Eve, and then Angelica in Prizzy's Honor, and then Meryl Streep in The Iron Lady is last.
Oh yes, no, that is for sure. I love Angelica Houston and Prizzy's honor, but I think I might have answered the question wrong.
I don't know exactly if who answered it right or wrong, but what is right or wrong?
What
Um,
is?
yes. Fun question here we always get from Rob Montoya. Fast forward to 2024 and recast all of these performances. So I don't know if you saw this ahead of time and have cast in your mind.
I have not, but it's Jennifer Lawrence in Pretty Woman. It's Nicole Kidman in The Grifters.
Hmm.
It's Mr. and Mrs. Bridge. Who do I want? Like an Imelda Staunton and Mr. and Mrs.
Hmm.
Bridge. Who are my other two? We just did this.
Annie
Who's
Wilkes.
Annie Wilkes? Who's playing Annie Wilkes nowadays? Like I mean, this is bad to say now because Mia Goth is not in a great place, but like it feels like a give it 10 years and Mia Goth would be great as Annie Wilkes. Um,
Yeah.
and then who's the fifth one?
Postcards. Postcards from the Edge.
Who's like acerbic like that? Let me think on that. You say yours.
So what I came up with is actually Jennifer Lawrence in Postcards from the Edge.
Yeah, that would be good
I
too.
think that would be interesting. The Pretty Woman one, I really kind of like overanalyzed this and tried to think of an actress who is not quite at superstar level yet, but could very much break out. And this is a very different kind of movie, I think, but I just went with Maya Hawke
Oh,
for
fun.
fun.
Yeah,
Yeah, a different spin on it. For the Grifters, I went with Jessica Chastain.
good. Yeah.
Yeah, she is Mother, of course. And for Mr. and Mrs. Bridge, I went with actually Michelle Pfeiffer. Now, I think
Michelle
could do it.
Pfeiffer in anything. But I
Yeah.
think another good Mr. and Mrs. Bridge choice would be Glenn.
Oh,
Yeah.
Glennie.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could see it. Yep. And then for Misery, I went decidedly off the board and once again try to pick someone who isn't like superstar necessarily. But I went with Merritt Weaver,
That would be great.
right?
love Merritt Weaver, and she could do that like comedy and sort of menacing. Really good. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think that would be fun. Did you think of anyone else for postcards or?
No, but I would love it if like as like a comeback vehicle for like a Dakota. Oh, maybe Dakota
Hmm.
Johnson, actually. I was gonna say Dakota
Oh
Fanning.
boy.
That's my answer.
Wow. I love that. Let's do a Melanie Griffith, Dakota Johnson
I
postcards.
love Dakota Johnson. I think she's super underrated.
Yeah. Both Celluloid Siren and Fritz had the exact same very specific question, which was interesting. Cast 5 Best Actress winners of the 50s in these parts.
I'm gonna abstain. I should have looked at
That's
these
okay. I'll
questions.
take it. There's a lot of casting questions here. I apologize. So Joanne is already a winner in the 50s, but she definitely wouldn't have played Mr. or Mrs. Bridge here. I'm going to say Susan Hayward in Misery. I think she can bring the right kind of crazy to that. Ingrid Bergman in The Grifters.
That's good.
Would
I
love to
like.
see it. The most obvious choice, Judy Holliday in Pretty Woman. Joanne Woodward, I'll put in Postcards from the Edge because I don't know. I don't see anyone else doing that. And I guess Shirley Booth in Mr. and Mrs. Bridge because there's not a lot of older winners there. So
Yeah, I could see like an Audrey in Pretty Woman, maybe.
yeah, that would certainly
A
fit
little
the
on the
bill.
nose.
Another casting again, recasting from Declan Cashin, who said cast one of the other Best Actress winners from the '90s in each of these roles.
Winners.
Yep,
So I think maybe Jessica Lange can tone it down long enough to be in Mr. and Mrs. Bridge.
I had that too.
Jodie Foster. I think Jodie Foster actually could be quite in like Maverick showed some penchant for comedy, so maybe she's in Postcards.
I could definitely
Um,
see that.
who's in
I said
Pretty?
Holly Hunter for that, but same
Oh yeah,
type.
yeah. That's Holly Hunter would be great in that. I mean, maybe Holly Hunter is in Misery.
Oh God.
That
Well, I
little
went with
tiny,
Frances McDormand there.
or all 4'11" of Francis. Or and then what do we have left? Pretty.
Grifters feels like Susan Sarandon. Easy.
Yeah, yeah. I was gonna maybe say Hilary Swank, but
Hmm.
too young at the time and not my fave.
I said Gwyneth Paltrow in Pretty Woman.
I love Gwyneth. I also think Gwyneth wouldn't be old enough. It wouldn't have been old enough, but I would have I also think could be very funny, and I wonder what it would have been like to see her in Postcards.
Yeah, definitely.
Frances McDormand in Misery is the right
Yeah.
call.
We got our hot girl shit question from Chelsea. Who is the hottest of our hot girls?
I mean, it's Julia Roberts, all that hair.
Right?
Like
I
a
mean,
movie called Pretty Woman.
it's right there. I do think Anjelica Huston, is a close contender.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, Anjelica Huston is about 40. She's serving body. She's
Mm-hmm.
serving wig. It's good.
Right. Yeah. Another one from Chelsea, who I've recently converted to watching Survivor. Which of these gals would win Survivor? Who's crushing the physical challenges, solving the puzzles, finding immunity idols, running the social game? I'm not sure if this is about like them as actresses or just these characters, but
If I were going to answer it as characters, I think Vivian is killing the social game.
oh yes,
I think that Angelica's doing the alliances and probably the puzzles. I think she's probably very smart.
and finding
Um,
those idols.
yeah. And physical, the physical challenges, none of these ladies strike me as like really digging in the dirt, crawling in the sand kind
Yeah,
of women, but maybe Julia, maybe Vivian
I think.
again.
Yeah,
I mean, I think Annie Wilkes takes the whole thing because she's, I think, nuts. So, you know,
I think she would be considered too unlikable to win a jury vote.
fair.
So I don't
She
know.
would be the Russell. She'd be too
There
much
we.
of a Russell. She
Annie
takes
Wilkes.
Parvati, who is Vivian, yeah, to the end.
There we go. Yeah, I love it. And Meryl's there too, doing something. Yeah, so Kevin Clowder said 1990 was the year Law and Order premiered in the US. Cast these 5 nominees in the roles of lead detective, junior detective, lead prosecutor, assistant prosecutor, and crusty lieutenant/DA.
I know we don't have it. I know it wasn't an option, but like Joanne Woodward, Mr. and Mrs. Bridge is like the judge, right? Like,
Yeah,
the judge
feels
that
like,
pops
yeah.
up. Angelica and Julia are the grizzled cop and the young cop.
Yeah, I could see it.
Um,
Is Meryl the lead prosecutor and Kathy
yeah,
is her assistant?
for sure. It's hard to cast Annie Wilkes, Kathy in one of these. But yeah, that's definitely it.
Of course, Joey Gentili cast these 90s Oscar talents and Karen Black in the roles above. Karen Black, Kristen Scott Thomas, Kathleen Quinlan, Janet McTeer, Marianne Jean Baptiste. What a mix. What a mix.
Karen Black is Annie Wilkes.
Correct.
Right?
Objectively. Yeah.
I mean, there's no
Yeah.
question.
Mm-hmm.
Kathleen Quinlan. I mean,
I put her in Mr. and Mrs. Bridge. No offense.
yeah, sure. Great. Perfect.
Yeah.
Gorgeous. Marianne Jean Baptiste is I
said Postcards because the other two I put Janet McTeer in The Grifters and I put Kristen Scott Thomas in Pretty Woman.
Yeah, that's tough because I do think that Janet McTeer could be quite funny,
Yeah.
Kristen Scott Thomas could be quite disarming in The Grifters, but I think that that's probably it.
Eric Maxwell Brunn said, would you have nominated Andie MacDowell for Green Card?
No. Next.
Wow. I don't think I've seen it, to be honest.
That movie just like did so well with I don't think I think Andie MacDowell turned into a great actress, but I don't think that she was that interesting early in her career.
I liked her in Sex Lives videotape, but
yeah,
maybe that's just me.
No, I did too, but it felt like that was like the one-off, and then she took a long time to catch up to it.
Fair. Yeah. Ben Roberts said, should Cher have been nominated this year for Mermaids?
I mean, I would have loved it. It's hard to figure out who you're going to take out of
Cher into this lineup. My goodness.
I love Mermaids. I love her in Mermaids.
Yeah, she's great.
Like, it's hard to figure out who you would excise from it. It's a pretty good lineup, but I would have loved it.
Yeah. It's tough. I don't know if I would nominate Cher because I think this is a really great top 5 that we have here. And Winona Ryder's obviously really great in Mermaids too.
Yeah, she won something. She won something in supporting, like a Critics' Prize.
Yeah, even though it's her movie. But anyway, Patrick Ross said, do you think Glenn deserved a spot here for Reversal of Fortune? If so, who does she replace?
I'm sorry to have to say this, but no, I do not.
Well,
again, I don't think I don't think that there's anyone to take out. So it's really hard to say.
I think there was category confusion with her as well, because is she lead? Is she supporting? I personally kind of find her to be supporting in Reversal of Fortune, so I would say no here.
Yeah, no, I think she has a better shot at it in supporting for sure.
Yeah, and our friend Mark O'Donovan has the last question here. Why didn't Glennie get her Ironweed nomination for Reversal of Fortune? Love that verbiage there.
Yeah.
Again, category confusion.
Category fraud. Yep. Confusion, I shouldn't say fraud.
Yeah. All right, let's get to our final segment where we will reveal who we think was the runner-up of this Best Actress race. Eddie, tough call. What do you think?
I think it's Anjelica Huston. I think that she had a lot of momentum. I think at this time, the Academy was more inclined to give somebody... I think part of the thing that was a knock to her, she just won. But I think that they were more inclined to do this at the time. Meryl, Sally Field, Jodie Foster would go on to, win a couple in a few years. Span. Same thing with Hilary Swank later in the 80s and 90s. So I think it's Anjelica Huston.
Well, I actually agree with you. I do think it was Anjelica Huston. I think you can look at it without context and say, oh, it was probably Julia Roberts because she had the most impact after this. But I don't think she was really in win contention necessarily. I think the nomination was maybe the reward there. And I think for Joanne, she could have contended. She could have taken up that sentimental older vote because it's just sort of a youngish skewing lineup. But I don't know if she really actively sought out a win here. She didn't even go. She wasn't interested in any of this.
It's a little weird, and I don't want to go back to the beginning of the podcast because that would take a long time. But I do feel like my answer for most devastating Oscar win, there's an argument to be made for Whoopi in 1985 to Geraldine Page. And I think that there's some cosmic sort of, Whoopi now wins in 1990 for Best Supporting Actress. Again, one of, I think, the best Oscar wins of all time.
Yeah.
And maybe there's some blowback after 1985 of them giving this, the Oscar in the intervening 5 years to Geraldine Page over this amazing revelatory performance.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe there's that influences the idea that like, well, we shouldn't go for honoring, kind of like giving a career achievement. Not that I think that this would have been solely a career achievement to Joanne Woodward, but I wonder if some of that plays into it, especially as Whoopi is in the supporting actress category, reminding these voters that they did that 5 years ago. So I do think, I wonder if subconsciously that plays a little bit into it.
Interesting. Yeah, I definitely did not think about that, but yeah, and it definitely seems like we're getting away from that kind of win moving forward. Okay, so who would you have voted for from this lineup?
I think I would have voted for Julia Roberts, but I'm gonna say Kathy Bates.
Interesting. Like younger, you would have voted for Julia, or just like,
I think I would have been like swept up in the Julia Pretty Woman of it all, but then when I think when voting came, I think that's it. I think when voting came, I would have been one of the people of being like, remember she broke that woman's legs? And I have 30 years. I mean, she broke James Cotton's legs. I have 30 years of loving Julia Roberts in that role to say that I would have voted for it. I think at the time, maybe my heart would have said Julia and my head would have prevailed in Kathy Bates.
So what you would have gone in the metaphorical voting booth and you were just like, I have to have like a real like think on this and realize, no, it has to be Kathy.
Yeah, I think that's yes. Gotcha. Kathy. Yes.
Yes, I also would have voted for Kathy Bates here. I just think the novelty of her even being here in the first place, I would have just been swept up in that narrative. And I just think it's such an unforgettable turn, even compared to all these great performances that we've talked about. Even in the moment, it feels like it's always going to have lasting cultural impact. So yeah, it's 100% Kathy for me. Close runner-up, though, for me would be Anjelica Huston, who really struck me on this watch. So either way, I would have voted for one of the baddies. All right. Well, Eddie, thank you so much for joining me. This was such a fun beginning to the 90s. This was really great. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. This was great.
Yeah, and tell people where they could find more of you on the internet.
Oh, sure. You can follow me at where I will continue to talk about J-Lo not being nominated for an Oscar for Hustlers.
Never forget.
Eddie EDDIE _ Mouradian MOURADIAN. That is on Twitter and Instagram.
Very good. And thank you all so much for listening. You can find me at Kevin _Jacobson on pretty much all platforms. Shows at Oscar Runner Up, Instagram and The Runner Up Is. Rate, review, and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you liked what you heard and want to hear more, go to patreon.com/andtherunnerup is, where you can hear a whole bunch of bonus episodes. And next week, we'll be breaking down the Best Actress lineup of 1991, where the nominees were Gina Davis in Thelma and Louise, Laura Dern in Rambling Rose, Jodie Foster in The Silence of the Lambs, Bette Midler in For the Boys, and Susan Sarandon in Thelma and Louise, with the winner being Jodie Foster. So with that, thanks again, Eddie, and I will bid you all adieu.